After the bell, a woman still in the street has no answer that the watch is required to take. Work is not an answer. Errand is not an answer. It is simply the wrong hour to be a woman standing on stone. The bell is not loud. It is low and slack-tongued, and it runs on longer than seems necessary, and underneath it the river keeps moving beneath the two bridges in the dark the way it moves in daylight, without changing. Shutters knock closed one street at a time, from the top of the lane down. A dog near the river answers nothing in particular and then gives it up. A girl is standing in a doorway with her sleeves shoved back past the elbow, and the cold finds her forearms first, where the water has been all evening. The stone under her heel holds the day's damp and none of its warmth. Then the bell stops. The stopping is what the street actually hears. The word for this hour names a thing you can hold. A couvre-feu is a lid, clay or beaten iron, pierced with small holes, set down over the embers of a hearth so the fire is kept without being fed. It smothers the flame and keeps the heat sleeping in the ash until morning. The bell tells the city to put its lids on. Fires banked, shutters shut, doors barred, lights out. That is the whole of the instruction, and it was written for householders, for men with a threshold to stand behind. The bell does not send these women home. It only takes away the answer they can give if they are stopped. Because the city does not stop needing them. The wine still has to be carried up from the cellar, and the cups still have to be gathered, and the long table still has to be wiped down after the last man has been put out into the lane. The cloth finished this week still has to reach the seal house before the seal house opens. The child coming tonight in a room on the far bank does not know what hour it is, and will not be persuaded to wait for one. So there are 3 of them out in it tonight, in a Paris made narrow by frost, in the last years of a century that is nearly finished with itself. One is behind a tavern door on the island, wringing a cloth into a bucket, with an hour of work still ahead of her, and no legal reason to be doing it. One is on the right bank with a bolt of Flemish wool on her shoulder, walking a route she chose in daylight for its corners. One is halfway across the small bridge with her hands inside her sleeves, going toward a house where she has been sent for, at the only kind of work in this city that the night forgives. None of them will meet. The frost goes on setting in the cart ruts, quietly, all night, and none of them will be recorded as having been anywhere at all. You are on the island first, because the island is where the bells are loudest and where the city keeps its courts, and because from here the 2 bridges go off north and south like the arms of a yoke. The Grand Pont carries the money changers and the goldsmiths and rows of houses built out over the water on their piles. The Petit Pont carries less and has been carried off by the river more than once, taken out at the piers by ice and by flood, and rebuilt each time in the same place because there is nowhere else to put it. At the far end of each bridge there is a gate. The gates close. Inside the walls the streets are narrow at the top, narrower than they are at the ground, because the upper stories of the houses lean out over the lane to catch a little more room. On a clear night this leaves a ribbon of sky the width of a cart. There is no light in the street itself, not a lamp, not a bracket, not a post. The idea of lighting a public street has not occurred to anyone with the money to do it, and will not for a long time yet. What light there is comes out of doorways when doorways open, and out of windows that have not been shuttered properly, and out of the hands of the people walking. That last is the important one, and it is easy to miss. The light you carry is not for seeing. The stones you walk on are stones you have walked on since you could walk, and your feet know the crown of the road, and the gutter running down the middle of it, and the 2 places where the paving gives out and becomes packed earth. You do not need a candle for that. You carry a candle so that other people can see that you are carrying a candle. A lantern in the hand is a statement about yourself made in advance to whoever is coming up the lane. It says that you have nothing arranged. A person moving in the dark without one has, by the simple fact of it, chosen the dark. The watch understands this. There is a royal watch of some 60 men, paid, and there is a watch of the trades, which is served in rotation by the craftsmen of the city, each guild sending its share to stand at a post or walk around. The statutes of the trade set down which crafts must serve and which are excused, and the excused list is short and much argued over. These men are not police in any sense you would recognise. They are a carpenter, and a baker, and a maker of buckles, who would all rather be asleep, holding staves, walking a fixed circuit, and stopping people. What they are stopping people for is not a crime. It is the hour. If you've drifted this far, subscribe and let yourself drift the rest of the way. Back to the story. And across the ends of streets, at the heads of the bridges, at the mouths of the lanes that run down to the water, there are chains. Iron chains on rings set into the cornerstones, slack in the daytime and lying in the gutter where the carts roll over them, and raised at night across the gap at the height of a man's thigh. The city has had them taken away once, in the year of the mallets, when the crowd used them, and the city has had them given back. They do not stop anyone. A chain at thigh height stops a horse and slows a cart and makes a sound. Stepping over one is nothing. Stepping over one is the whole thing. Because the ordinances that empty this city at night were written about householders. They speak of the master of a house, of his fire, of his door, of his apprentices and his servants brought inside before the bell. A woman is somewhere inside that sentence. She is not the subject of it. She is part of the household being gathered in. And so, when she is not gathered in, when she is out on the stone at an hour when the ordinance says the household is shut, there is no category ready for her. The category that is ready, the one the watch will reach for because it is the only one hanging on the hook, is disorder. It is worth being exact about this, because it is easy to overstate and the overstatement is worse than the fact. She is not erased. She does not stop being a person in law. She can still sue, still hold property, still swear to a debt, still be named in a will, and name others in her own. The register of the criminal court at the Châtelet survives from these very years, and it is full of women's names, their streets, their trades, their words taken down. What happens after the bell is smaller and more corrosive than erasure. It is that the burden turns over. Before the bell, she is a woman going somewhere. After it, she is a woman who must explain. An explanation is a thing that has to be accepted by someone else. So each of them has a strategy, and the strategies are not courage, they are logistics. One of them uses a door. One of them uses a route she walks in daylight the week before, counting corners. One of them uses a reason so old and so necessary that no watchman in this city will hold her for it, and she has learned to say that reason in the first 4 words she speaks. Isabel is 17 and works the room at a tavern on the island, with a burn on the inside of her right wrist from a jug that came off a hook, and she wants to hear the end of a song she has only ever heard the middle of. Grille came from Bruges as a girl and is 34 and carries finished cloth for a draper in the Marais, with a groove worn into the pad of her left thumb from thread, and she wants a window she does not have to patch. Perrette is somewhere past 50, and is a sworn midwife of this city, with hands that have begun to ache in the cold before the rest of her notices the cold, and she wants to give her oath away to the right girl, while she's still the one choosing. They are composites, drawn from the records of women who did exactly these 3 jobs at exactly this hour, and that is the last time it will be said. The night is a winter night, dry, with frost coming. It will get colder until the hour before it gets light, and then it will hold. Nothing in it is going to happen that would be written down. You have the whole of it now. There is nothing being kept from you and nothing waiting at the end. What is left is the walking. The Rue de la Juiverie after the bell. The tavern room is one room, low, with a beam across it that everyone taller than Isabel has learned about the hard way. There are 2 trestle tables and a bench along the wall, and a fire that has been down to coals for some while now, and the smell of the place is wine gone slightly sour in the straw, and wet wool, and the tallow of the candles that have been burning since the light went. You come in from the lane and the change is not in what you see. It is in the temperature and in the sound. Outside, the frost is starting to take the mud in the gutter. Inside, the air is thick and used and warm at head height, colder at the floor, and there is the flat noise of 6 men talking with their elbows on wood. The bell has been finished for a little while. It reached this room the way it reaches every room on the island, through the shutters rather than the door, low and without edges, and it did not stop the talking. It never does. What it does is start a slow accounting behind the tavern keeper's eyes, because the ordinance is written about him. A tavern is to be shut and its fire covered and its lights out at the ringing. If the watch comes up the lane and finds this door open and this room lit, it is not the 6 men on the bench who will be answering to the provost's people. It is the man pouring for them. He knows the sum. He's doing it now in his head, against the price of the wine still in the cask. If you've drifted this far, subscribe and let yourself drift the rest of the way. Back to the story. Isabel is at the far end with a bucket and a cloth, and her sleeves are up, and the water in the bucket has been warm twice tonight and is not warm now. She works the cloth around the base of a cup, along the rim, into the join where the handle meets the body, and sets it upside down on the board, then another. Her fingers have gone the colour of the inside of a shell, and there is a place on her right wrist, on the inside where the skin is thinnest, that is shiny and slightly raised, from a jug that came off its hook in the summer and took the skin with it. She has stopped noticing it except in cold water, when it goes tight and tells her about itself. You can stand near the fire without being in anyone's way. This is the part of the room nobody wants after the coals go down, because the heat coming off them now is the kind you have to be almost sitting in. The straw here is packed flat and dark. It was fresh in the autumn and it has not been changed since, and it holds everything that has been spilled on it, and when someone shifts their boot in it there is a small dead crunch, and then a lift of smell that is sour and sweetish at once. Higher up the tallow candle's gutter. Tallow does that. It is rendered fat set round a wick, and it burns lower and greasier than wax, and it wants attention, a trim every so often, or it starts to smoke and the smoke goes to the ceiling and stays. Wax candles do not do this. Wax candles burn clean and upright and cost what they cost, and they are for churches and for people with plate on their tables, and there are none in this room, and there never have been. The men on the bench are drinking under fat, and the fat is drawn from the same animals whose smell is on the tanner's side of the water when the wind turns. Nobody comments on it. It is simply the light, the way rain is simply rain. Isabel has never in her life read by a candle and does not know anyone who has. What a candle is for in a room like this is to keep the cups from being knocked, and to show the keeper the level in a jug at a distance. Earlier, before the light went, the wine in this cask was cried in the street outside. That is a trade of its own in this city, with its own written statutes and its own oath, and the man who does it is not a hawker. He is a crier of wine. He comes to the door, takes a measure, tastes it, and then goes down the lane calling the price and the place, so that the price is public and cannot be quietly moved. There are rules about how many houses a crier may serve and what he may take, and the whole apparatus exists to keep a tavern from telling one man one price and another man another. Isabel heard him at the top of the lane and heard him come back down it, and she can still hear the shape of the phrase in her head, worn smooth from repetition. The crying is a daylight thing. It stops with the light, because the point of it is that the street can hear it and the street is in the street. After the bell, the price of the wine in a room like this is whatever the keeper and the drinker settle between them, and it is settled in chalk. There is a board by the door, planed smooth, blackened with use at the edges, and on it are the marks, not names. Marks, a cross, a hook, a stroke with a tail on it. Each man knows his own, and the keeper knows all of them, and Isabel knows about half. Nobody writes a word. Writing a word would require somebody in this room to be able to. You watch her carry 4 cups at once, 2 hooked in each hand by the handles, knuckles white with the grip, and set them down on the board without a sound. There is a way of doing that. The trick is to let the base touch first at an angle and roll it flat rather than putting it down square, and she learned it in a week and has done it 10,000 times since. This is most of what her body knows. Not the names of the streets, though she knows those, and not the feast days, though she knows those too. What her body knows is the exact height of the beam, and the give of the 3rd floorboard, and how many cups she can hold before the 4th starts to slide. The men are at the stage of the night where the talk has gone from the day into older ground. One of them is telling something about his brother that the others have heard, and they are letting him tell it because it is easier than stopping him. Their voices come in a low overlapping roll, and under the voices is the small ticking of the coals settling, and under that further off the river. You do not hear the river as water. You hear it as a kind of absence of edges from the north side of the room, a softness where the sound of the city ought to bounce back and does not. It is there all night. Isabel has never lived anywhere it was not. The door is shut and barred, which is the arrangement. Being open is the offence. Being full is not, or not in any way that gets written down. So the keeper bars the door, and the 6 men stay, and the shutters are pulled to, and the strip of light under the door is the only thing giving the room away. Somebody outside standing directly on the threshold would see it. Nobody outside is standing on the threshold. The watch, when it comes down the Rue de la Juiverie, comes down the middle, where the crown of the road is, because that is where the footing is best and where you can see both sides at once, and from the middle of the road a strip of light under a door is nothing at all. If you've drifted this far, subscribe and let yourself drift the rest of the way. Back to the story. Across the lane and one story up there is a light in a window that has not been shuttered. It is not moving. It has not moved all evening. When Isabel came out earlier to throw the bucket into the gutter, she looked up at it without deciding to, the way you look at a thing that is always there, and then she came back in. It is not a candle being carried, and it is not a fire. It is small and steady and yellow and low in the frame, as though it were set on a sill and left. She has seen it every night she has worked here. In summer, when the light held until the men were already drunk, she did not notice it, and now that the dark comes down before the second jug, it is simply part of the lane, like the 2 posts at the corner, or the place where the gutter widens. The house it belongs to is narrow and old, and its ground floor is shuttered from the inside all day. She has never seen anyone behind it. The keeper comes through with the poker and does not use it. He looks at the coals, which are down to the last red under a grey shell, and he decides against feeding them, and he stands there for a moment with his hand on the beam. He is a heavy man with a bad hip who moves as though the room were narrower than it is. He tells Isabel, without turning round, that there is the cellar to do. She says that she knows. This is not an exchange. It is 2 people confirming a thing that was going to happen anyway, and it takes less than a breath, and neither of them looks at the other while it happens. Then he crouches, which costs him something, and lays the iron cover over the coals. It is a shallow dome, pierced through in a ring of small holes, and it goes down over the last of the fire with a sound like a lid on a pot. The red goes out of the room. What is left comes up through the holes in threads, and the heat comes with it. Slower, held back, meant to last until morning. The cellar is under the room and reached by a stair that turns once, and the door to it is in the floor and lifts on 2 iron straps. Down there it is not cold in the way the street is cold. It is cold in the way a stone is cold, level and unmoving, the same in January as in August, and the smell is entirely different from the room above. Earth and damp cooperage, and the sweetish acid of wine that has soaked into wood over years. It takes 4 steps to lose the noise of the men. By the 6th you can hear the river again closer down here coming through the stone. She will do it later, when the men are gone. For now she finishes the cups, and then the jugs, which are worse, because a jug has a neck and the cloth has to be pushed down into it on 2 fingers and worked around blind. The water in the bucket has gone from grey to something with a skin on it. She takes it to the door, unbars it a hand's width, throws the water into the gutter in one flat arc, and hears it hit and start moving downhill. The cold comes in through the gap and gets to her wet forearms before she has the bar back across. That is the thing about the arms. Everything else is dressed. She's in wool, 2 layers, with a linen shift underneath that has been washed so often it has gone soft as skin, and a cloth over her hair pinned at the nape. Her feet are in leather that has been resoled twice and is damp through in the left one. All of that is manageable. The forearms are bare because they have to be, because sleeves in a bucket are sleeves wet to the elbow all night, and so the cold gets one clean, uninterrupted piece of her from wrist to elbow and holds it, and does not let go until she is close to the fire again. By the door there is a hoop hanging outside on an iron pin above the lintel, and it is invisible now and will be visible at first light. That is the sign. Not a painted board, not a name. A hoop, or a bush of greenery gone brown, hung out to say that there is wine in this house for sale. Everyone knows it and everyone knew it before they could read, and reading would not have helped them. Isabel could tell you every hoop and bush and bundle on this street, and the 4 streets around it, and could tell you which of them had been up so long the twigs had gone bare. The talk on the bench is thinning out. One of the men has stopped contributing and is looking at the table. Another is doing the slow blink of someone who has decided to leave and has not yet told his legs. The keeper is standing near them without standing over them, which is a skill, and he will get them out in a little while one at a time, through a door opened as narrow as a shoulder. Isabel has moved to the long table and started at the far end with a fresh cloth, working the wood in long strokes with the grain, pushing crumbs and spill toward the near edge and into her cupped hand. The room is quieter than it was. The coals have gone from red to a dull orange that only shows if you stop looking directly at them. Somewhere above, a floorboard takes somebody's weight and lets it go. Isabel wipes to the end of the table, straightens, and puts one hand flat in the small of her back for a moment and then takes it away again. If you've drifted this far, subscribe and let yourself drift the rest of the way. Back to the story. The cellar stair is the part of the night she takes slowly. The chain across the Rue du Temple. On the right bank, the streets run wider and end sooner, and the ground under them is not the ground it was. This whole quarter was marsh inside living memory of somebody's grandmother, reeds and standing water, and the river coming up into it whenever the river felt like it. It was drained in stages, by ditch and by dike, and the religious houses took the best of it and put it under cultivation. And even now, with houses along the frontages, there are garden plots behind them, deep and long and running back from the street in strips. In summer, this quarter smells of onions and turned earth. In frost, it smells of almost nothing, which is its own kind of information. Greel comes out of the draper's yard with the bolt across her left shoulder and her right hand upholding it, and she stands for a moment inside the gateway before she steps into the lane. This is deliberate. The gateway is dark and the lane is less dark, and if she goes straight out, she'll be moving before her eyes have arrived. So she stands. She counts, without knowing she's counting, somewhere around 15, and by the end of it the lane has assembled itself. The crown of the road, the gutter down the middle, the black gap where the alley comes in on the left, the pale smear at the far end where the frost has taken the ruts. The bolt weighs what it weighs. Finished woolen cloth is heavier than anyone expects who has not carried it, because it has been fulled, pounded and shrunk and thickened until the weave has closed up on itself and the surface has gone felty, and a bolt of it holds the damp of the yard and every stage of the work still in it. It sits on the shoulder like a sleeping animal. The trick is not strength. The trick is the angle, tipped just past vertical, so the weight runs down through the shoulder into the hip and the hip carries it, and the hand is only there to keep it from rolling. Get the angle wrong, and it comes off in the first 10 steps. You're walking behind her at the distance you would keep if you did not want to be heard, which is further than you think. Her shoes are turn shoes, single-soled, stitched inside out and turned, and they make almost nothing on frozen mud. In the wet months this street is a misery, and she goes the long way round by the paved stretch. Tonight the mud has set hard as fired clay in the shapes it held at dusk, ruts and hoofprints and the half-moon of a cartwheel, and it is like walking across a floor that somebody dropped. Twice her ankle goes over and comes back. She does not slow down for it. There is a chain at the end of this street. She knew there would be. There is a chain at the end of most streets that matter, and at the heads of both bridges, and at every lane that runs down toward the water. Iron links on a ring set into the cornerstone of the house, hooked across at the height of a man's thigh, and made fast on the other side. In daylight the chain lies slack in the gutter, and the carts go over it, and the links have worn the stone at the ring into a bright bevel. At night it is up. It is not a barrier. It is a horse stopper and a cart stopper, and it makes a sound if you take it carelessly. The city has had these taken off it once in the year of the mallets, when the crowd went to the arsenal and then went to the chains, and afterward the chains were gathered in and the street stood open for a while. Then they came back, because a city that has once been closed by its own chains does not leave them lying about, and because the men who wanted them back had better reasons written down than the men who did not. Greel was a young woman in this quarter when they went, and a less young one when they returned, and she could not tell you the difference the absence made to a night like this one, which is none. She takes it the way she takes all of them. Left hand comes down off the bolt and finds the link. Right hand stays up, and she puts the near leg over first with the knee high, then transfers, then brings the other. The chain does not move. That is the whole art of it. Not clearing the chain, which a child could do, but clearing it with 100 and some pounds of wet wool on your shoulder, without the link speaking. Cold iron under the palm for the length of 2 breaths. Then she's on the other side, and her hand goes back up to the bolt, and the whole thing is finished. She has taken this same chain perhaps 400 times. There was a period of about a year when she took it badly, catching it with the trailing heel, and the sound it made was not loud and carried absurdly far down a street of shuttered houses, and she can still feel the particular way her stomach dropped at it. The correction was to raise the second knee more than felt necessary. It felt ridiculous for a month, and then it stopped feeling like anything. That is the moment. It is worth being plain about what it is and what it is not. Nothing changes about her when the leg goes over. She does not become another category of person. There is no statute that fires when the chain is crossed. What changes is smaller and works in one direction only. If you've drifted this far, subscribe and let yourself drift the rest of the way. Back to the story. Before the bell, a woman on this street with cloth on her shoulder is a woman with cloth on her shoulder, and the cloth explains her. After the bell, the cloth explains nothing, because the ordinances have already said that nobody should be finishing cloth at this hour, and the cloth on her shoulder is now, if anyone chooses to make it so, the evidence rather than the excuse. The reason for that rule is written down, and it is not what you would guess. It is not about morals, and it is not about riot. Trade after trade in this city has it set into its statutes that no man of the craft may work by night, and the reason given, when a reason is given, is the light. Candlelight is not sufficient to make work that is good and loyal. You cannot see a slub in a thread by tallow. You cannot judge a dye. You cannot count a warp. So the crafts forbade the night to themselves, in writing, to keep the standard up and to keep the man with a cellar and 40 candles from undercutting the man who worked in daylight like everyone else. It is a good rule, and it was made by people who meant it. It also means that every hour of work done after the bell in this city is, on paper, bad work, and everybody doing it is, on paper, a person producing something the craft would not stand behind. Greeley has finished cloth by candle. She has spun by it and reeled by it, and she would agree with the statute if it were read to her, and she would still have done it, because the cloth was wanted by Thursday, and because the daylight in December runs out at the point in the afternoon when the work is half done. In June, the two things agree with each other, and there is no offence anywhere in this city. In December, they do not agree at all. The days shorten from both ends, and the work does not shorten with them, and the difference between what the statutes assume about a working day and what a working day actually is, in the middle of winter, in a room facing north, is about 4 hours. Those 4 hours are where most of her life has happened. The lane narrows and then opens where a garden gate stands in a long stretch of wall. Behind the wall the strips run back, vines on frames, beds under straw, a pear tree she has watched for 11 years and never eaten from. The frost has got into all of it. You can hear it faintly if you stop, not the frost itself, which is silent, but the small collapses it causes, a leaf letting go, a crust of earth settling. The cold here is different from the cold in the street because there is nothing to hold the day's heat, no stone, no wall of houses, and the open ground gives everything up to the sky. Greel feels it as a change in her face before anywhere else, a thin edge along the cheekbone and under the eyes, and she pulls the cloth at her neck up over the lower half of it without stopping. She keeps it there for the length of the wall. The moment the houses start again on both sides, she takes it down, because breathing through wool makes the wool wet, and wet wool at her throat for 2 more streets is worse than the wool was. She shifts the bolt across to the other shoulder without breaking stride, which takes a duck of the head and a half turn and a moment where the whole weight is unsupported and travelling. Her left shoulder comes free and immediately starts to ache, which is how she knows how long she has been carrying. There is a groove in the pad of her left thumb, worn in and permanent, a shallow channel where thread has run across it for 20-odd years. It does not hurt. It catches on linen. She has to lick it in winter when it cracks. There is a matching one, shallower, on the first joint of the forefinger, and between the two of them they are the whole record of her trade written on her hand. Nobody has ever asked her about them. Every woman she has ever worked beside has had the same pair in the same 2 places, and among such women a hand without them would be the thing worth remarking on, and would be remarked on, and would not be given fine work until it had them. The frost is beginning to show on the north faces of things, not a coating, a bloom, like the film on a plum, on the shaded side of a post, on the north lip of a rut, on the iron of the gate hinge. She notices it the way she notices anything on this walk, which is peripherally and for its practical content. Frost on the hinge means the ground is going below, and it will be worse at the far end where the way runs low. She adjusts, without thinking about adjusting, to the wheel rut on the left where the earth is churned rough and gives grip. The route she's walking she chose in daylight, last week, on an afternoon when she had an errand at the far end anyway. She walked it once with nothing on her shoulder, slowly, and looked at the corners. What she was looking at was sight lines, which turns let you see the whole of the next stretch before you commit to it, and which ones put you into a length of wall with no doorway for 40 paces. She rejected 2 streets that are shorter. The route she kept is longer by a good way and has 7 turns in it, and every one of the 7 gives her the next piece of street before she is in it. If you've drifted this far, subscribe and let yourself drift the rest of the way. Back to the story. You could call this fear, and it would be the wrong word. Fear is a weather. This is a decision made once in the afternoon, in good light, by a woman with a sensible cast of mind, and then not thought about again. She's not frightened walking this route. She's bored by it. The boredom is the entire point, and it took an afternoon of unpaid time to build, and she will use it for as long as she carries for this draper, and then she will build another one for the next. Through the wall on her right, from inside a house with its shutters closed, there is a woman's voice counting. Not loudly. It is the flat even count of somebody who is not paying attention to it, going up in ones, and it has been going since before Greel came level with the house, and it is still going after she is past. It gets into the 20s and Greel is beyond it. There is no other sound from the house. No talk, no answer, nothing that a count would ordinarily be for. She has heard it before on this street at about this point more than once, and once in daylight, though in daylight there was too much else going on to be certain of it. The voice is not young and not old. It does not hurry and it does not slow at the round numbers the way a person hurries and slows when they are counting a thing they want finished. The cold is at its useful stage now, the stage where it has stopped being an announcement and become a condition. Her feet are past complaining. Her breath has stopped showing because the air is dry. There is a rhythm in her that she does not choose. The step, the small compression in the hip where the weight lands, the pull in the neck on the loaded side. And it has taken over from thinking in the way that walking does. 3 streets and a courtyard from here there is a door with a light behind it and a man who will not be pleased to be woken. She goes on down the middle of the road where the crown is highest and the frost has not settled, past a doorway with a broom lent in it, past the black mouth of a passage she does not look into, because she looked at it last week in daylight, and knows it runs 11 paces to a wall. The bolt is warm on the shoulder now. Everything else has gone the temperature of the street. The wayhouse door is the one she has to be at before it opens. If you're drifting now, let yourself go. Nothing here needs you awake for it. Subscribe so the next story is waiting when you return. Sleep well. The Petit Pont going over. The small bridge is not a bridge in the way you are picturing. It is a street that happens to have water under it. There are houses built along both sides of it, standing on the piers, 3 stories in places, leaning, with their backs out over the current and their fronts onto a roadway barely wide enough for 2 carts to argue in. Walking across it, you see almost no river. You see doors and shutters and the same overhanging upper stories you would see anywhere in the city, and you know the water is there because of the sound coming up through the boards and through the gaps between the houses, and because the cold is a different cold, wetter, arriving from underneath. Parate is a third of the way over with her hands pushed up inside her sleeves and her elbows tucked in. She walks at a pace that looks slow and is not. It is the pace of someone who has worked out over decades exactly how fast she can go through this city without arriving anywhere out of breath, and it does not vary for hills or for hurry. Her bag is on a strap across her body, under the outer layer, so that its shape is inside her silhouette and not hanging off it. She has a horn lantern in her right hand, inside the sleeve, unlit. Everything she carries is carried in a way that makes it part of her outline rather than an addition to it, and this is not modesty, and it is not stealth. A shape with nothing swinging off it reads, at distance, in bad light, as a shape with nothing worth taking. The river takes this bridge out from time to time. It has done it more than once, ice coming down in a mass in a hard winter and packing against the piers until the piers go, or a flood in spring shouldering the whole middle of it away in a night. Each time, the city has put it back in the same place, because the ford underneath is where it is, and the island is where it is, and there is nowhere else to cross without going a long way about. Some of the houses on it are newer than others by exactly the width of one disaster. Perrette has lived through one rebuilding and remembers the year mostly by the mud, and by the crossing being done in boats for a season, at a price, by men who had never made so much money and never would again. The people whose houses went into the water were mostly compensated in argument. The bridge that stands now feels solid underfoot in the way a floor feels solid, which is to say completely, and there is no sensation available to a person walking on it that would tell them otherwise. If you've drifted this far, subscribe and let yourself drift the rest of the way. Back to the story. At the far end, on the left bank, there is a gatehouse of grey stone standing across the roadway, squat and thick with a passage through it and a chamber above. Every road into this city ends in something like it. This one has a guard on it at night, and chains and a bar, and it is one of the places where a person walking after the bell is most reliably going to be spoken to. Perrette knows all of the men who are likely to be on it by sight, and about half of them by name, and one of them by the fact that she was in the room when he was born. She has never mentioned this to him, and does not intend to. It would change nothing about the way he handles the gate, and it would put something between them that neither of them has any use for at midnight in a stone passage. What it does is sit in her, privately, as a piece of arithmetic about how long she's been doing this, of the kind that arrives more often lately. You are beside her now, on the left, on the side away from the gutter. There is no gutter in the middle here. The boards are laid to shed water to the sides, and the sides drain through gaps to the river. Under the boards, the sound is constant and not loud, a heavy sliding of water past stone with an occasional deeper note where a pier splits the flow. Every so often there is a knock, something floating that has come up against a starling and turned and gone on. She has never once looked over to see what it was, and neither has anyone else who lives here. The reason she can walk this bridge tonight and Isabel could not is a matter of 4 words. Perrette is a sworn midwife of this city. She took an oath, in front of people who mattered, and the oath is on record, and it is the kind of thing a man on a gate can check in the morning if he wants to be difficult, and no man on a gate has ever wanted to be that difficult. She has said the words so often that they come out flat and without any music at all. She is going to a woman. That is the sentence. It has never once failed. What sits behind the oath is the part that gives it teeth, and it is not tenderness. It is baptism. A child that comes badly or comes early or comes blue may not last the walk to a church, and a child that dies unbaptized is a thing the church has an enormous and unhappy amount to say about. So the midwife is given the authority to do it herself, in the room, with water from the house, with the right words. She is the only person in that room who can, and there is no time in which to send for anyone who could do it better. So she was taught the words and taught them exactly, because the form has to be right, and she was taught what to do if only a part of the child has come and time has run out, and she was taught to say afterward, to the household and to the priest in the morning, precisely what she did and precisely when. That last part is the one that gets forgotten in the telling. The authority comes with an account owed. It is worth sitting with how strange that is, in a city arranged the way this one is arranged. Everything else in her life is fenced. She cannot plead in certain courts on her own account. She cannot enter certain trades. Her testimony in some matters is worth a fraction of a man's, and she has been in rooms where it was treated that way to her face. And then there is a night, and a candle, and a child that is not going to breathe long, and the whole apparatus of the thing steps back and hands the sacrament to her, because there is nobody else, and because the rule was written by people who had thought clearly about what actually happens in a birth room at 3 a.m. She does not think about this often. It is not a thing she turns over. It is simply the shape of the ground she stands on, and she has stood on it for 30 years, and the only time it comes to the front of her mind is on a gate, when she says her 4 words and watches a man step aside. Tonight her hands are aching. They started before she left her own door, and they are worse now, in the wet cold coming up off the water, a deep ache in the joints of the fingers and across the back of the hand, and it is not the sort that goes when you get inside. The bag under her arm has in it linen strips, boiled and dried and folded, a small pot of grease, a length of cord and a pair of shears with the blades bound, a candle stub and flint, and a shallow cup. The cup is for the water, if the water is needed. She has never told anyone that she carries the cup rather than using whatever the house has, and if asked she would say something about cleanliness, and the real reason is that in a house where a child is going badly, nobody can find anything, and she is not going to spend the last minute of somebody's life looking for a bowl. Ahead, where the house is on the bridge end and the gate begins, there is a widening, and a step up onto the stone. On the step against the wall, out of the wind, there is a bundle. It is not large. It is wrapped in something pale, and it has been set down carefully, squared to the wall, not dropped. Perrette sees it from 30 paces and does not change her pace at all. She goes past it on the outside, close enough to see that it is linen and that it is tied, and she does not stop and she does not look back at it. The gate is open a man's width, and there is a brazier inside the passage, which is the only fire anyone will see in the open air tonight in this city, and around it 2 men who are not looking at the road. She comes into the passage and the sound changes completely. The river cuts off, the ceiling is close, and every footstep comes back at her from 3 directions. If you've drifted this far, subscribe and let yourself drift the rest of the way. Back to the story. One of the men straightens. She says her 4 words before he has finished deciding to ask, which is the trick and which is why she says them at that distance and not closer, and he makes a noise that is not really a word and moves his shoulder, and she is through. On the other side, the left bank starts immediately and it is a different city. Steeper. The ground goes up from the water and keeps going, and the streets are older and worse made, and the schools are up there somewhere with their windows dark. The smell changes too. There is river on this side as well, and under it something drier and dustier, plaster and old timber, and the ash of a great many small fires banked at the same hour. The cold has stopped being wet and started being clean. That is the whole difference, and it is not a small one to a body that has been out for an hour. Wet cold gets into the cloth and stays and works inward all night. Dry cold sits on the outside of you and can be walked off. Perrette's shoulders come down half an inch somewhere in the first 30 paces up from the gate, and she does not notice them doing it, and her stride opens out. She climbs. The pace does not change. Her breathing does, slightly, deepening rather than quickening, and she lets her hands come out of her sleeves now, because she's going to need them shortly, and because they warm faster moving than tucked. The ache stays. It has been coming on for 2 winters and it arrives earlier each year, and she has begun, in a way she has told nobody, to time things by it, to know that she has perhaps 3 more winters of doing this properly, and perhaps 4, and that the difference matters to somebody who is not her. The girl she has in mind is 15, and does not know she's in mind. She has been in 3 rooms with Perrette, holding a light and fetching water and not fainting, which is more than most managed the first time, and she asked afterward, both times after the first, one exact question about something she had seen. That is the whole of the assessment, not gentleness, not nerve, the question afterward. Perrette has watched 4 girls come and go and has handed nothing to any of them. 2 are frightened of the work, which is no shame and is discovered quickly. 1 was not frightened of anything and could not be told, which is worse. 1 had it and married a man in Rouen. The oath is not a thing you can leave in a will. It has to go from a woman standing up to a woman standing up, in front of witnesses, while the first woman still has the standing to give it, and the whole of the difficulty is in that last clause. The street she wants runs off to the right, and it is narrow enough that the overhangs almost touch, and there is no light in it anywhere. She stops at the corner and does what Grille did at the gateway, stands and lets her eyes come the rest of the way, and counts without knowing she's counting. Somewhere up the street a shutter is loose and knocking in a draught. 1 soft irregular tap, not enough to wake a house, and enough to be the only thing there is. She takes the lantern out from her sleeve. It is a horn lantern, a wooden frame with panes of scraped ox horn that have gone the colour of weak honey, and a stub of tallow inside on a spike. Horn is used because horn does not break and does not blow out. It is boiled and split and pressed flat and scraped down until the light will come through it, and what comes through is soft and yellow and does not throw anything you could call a beam. A horn lantern at 10 paces is a smudge. At 2 paces it shows you a hand. She does not light it. She carries it low in her left hand where it can be seen, unlit, which is a compromise she came to years ago and has never examined. The object in the hand says what she needs it to say, and the flame would cost her a candle stub and would blind her for the length of the street. The house is the 4th on the left, and there is a light in the ground floor, and someone has been listening for her, because the door comes open before she reaches it. It is a long berth, and she will not be out of that room for some hours. The cellar stair and the chalk. The men go out one at a time, and the door is only ever open the width of a shoulder. This is the practice, and it has nothing to do with secrecy, because everyone on the street knows there are men in here, and the men are not quiet going home. It has to do with light. An open door throws a wedge of yellow across the lane and up the opposite wall, and a wedge of yellow is visible from the end of the street and from the corner and from the windows of 4 houses. A shoulder's width throws a stripe. Isabel holds the door herself for the last two, one hand on the edge and her body behind it, and each time the cold comes through the gap and finds the front of her, and each time she pushes it shut and the room closes back over. If you've drifted this far, subscribe and let yourself drift the rest of the way. Back to the story. The last man out is the one who is telling the story about his brother, and he pauses in the gap and says something to the keeper that is not an apology and is doing the work of one, and the keeper says something back that is not an acceptance and is doing the work of one, and then he has gone up the lane with his hand out to the wall. You can hear him for a long time. Sound at this hour goes further than it has any right to, because there is nothing else in it. No carts, no criers, no shutters being opened, nothing on the river. His footsteps recede in a way that is almost embarrassing to listen to, and then a door, and then nothing. If you've drifted this far, subscribe and let yourself drift the rest of the way. Back to the story. The keeper goes to the board by the door with a piece of chalk in his hand and stands in front of it. He's not adding anything up. He's looking at it. The board is the whole ledger of this house. A planed panel, blacked with soot and grease and years, and on it perhaps 20 marks in chalk in 3 ragged columns, a cross with a bar, a hook, 2 strokes and a curl. Each mark belongs to one man and every mark on the board is a debt, and the arrangement is that a man wipes his own mark off with his thumb when he pays, and the keeper watches him do it, and that is the receipt. There is no dispute mechanism beyond the two of them looking at the board together, and there does not need to be, because the whole thing runs on the fact that these men will be in this room next week and the week after and for the rest of their lives. A man who wipes a mark he has not paid has not stolen a jug of wine. He has finished with this street. There is not a single letter on the board, and there is not a single number. The keeper cannot write, and neither can any of the men, and the marks are older than any of them, inherited from the last keeper, and probably the one before that, the way a maker's mark on a pot is inherited. Isabel can tell you whose is whose for about half of them, and she learned it by watching thumbs. She has no mark. She's not a person who runs a debt here, because she's not a person who buys anything here, and the wine that goes into her at the end of a night goes in from the jug in the keeper's hand and is part of an arrangement that has no marks in it anywhere. What she has paid is partly coin, and partly the bed she sleeps in, which is a pallet in the corner of the room above, and partly the food, and the coin part is reckoned at the term days and not before. There are 2 of them in the year that matter, and the whole city runs on them, and between one and the next a servant in this city holds almost nothing in her hand at any moment. For the larger sums there is a different thing entirely, kept in a box under the board, and it is a bundle of sticks. Each one is a length of hazel about the size of a forearm, cut across with notches, and then split lengthwise down the middle so that the notches run across the break. The keeper holds one half and the other party holds the other. When the 2 halves are put together, the notches line up, or they do not, and no man can add a notch to his own half without the addition showing on the joint, because wood splits along its own grain, and no 2 splits are the same. It is a contract you can feel with a thumbnail in the dark, and it does not require anybody to be able to read. The notches themselves are cut to a system, a wide one for the large sum, a narrow one for the small, and a particular slanted cut where the count changes over. And the system is old and shared and understood from the coast to the mountains by people who have never met. A stick like this will be accepted in an argument in front of the provost's people, and the 2 halves will be fitted in the room while everyone watches, and that will be the end of the argument. Isabel has held one. She was sent once with a stick to a cooper on the other side of the island, and she carried it inside her sleeve for the length of the walk and gave it over and waited while the 2 halves were fitted, and the cooper grunted and gave hers back, and the whole errand took less time than she had allowed, and she used what was left standing on the Grand Pont looking at the water through a gap between 2 houses. She remembers the errand mostly for that. The stick is in the box now, 3rd from the top, and she could find it by the notch pattern with her eyes shut. The measures hang on the wall above the board, on pegs, in order of size. There is a pint and there is a chopin, which is half of it, and something smaller than that again, and they are of pewter with lips beaten down and rolled, and each of them has a mark stamped near the rim. The mark is the point. A measure in this city is checked and stamped, and a house selling by an unstamped measure or a short one is a house in front of the provost's people, answering a specific charge with a specific fine attached, and the measure itself gets taken away and destroyed in a way that is meant to be seen. which is why the measures are on pegs and not on a shelf. Isabel was told this on her second day and told it as a rule rather than as a reason. The measures go back on the pegs, always, the moment they are dry. If you've drifted this far, subscribe and let yourself drift the rest of the way. Back to the story. A measure that has been left on a table is a measure that gets knocked, and a pewter measure that has been knocked and dented is a measure that no longer holds what it says it holds, and the difference does not have to be large, and there is no way to argue about it afterward with a man holding a rod. She hangs them by feel now, 3 pegs, largest at the left, and she does it wet as well as dry despite the rule, because a wet measure on a peg drips onto the floor, and a wet measure on a table gets knocked. The rule and the reason have come apart in her hands over 2 years, and she has kept the part that works. You go down the cellar stair behind her. The trap is up on its 2 iron straps and propped, and the stair turns once, and it is stone, and each tread has a hollow worn into the middle of it, deeper on the 4th and 5th than anywhere else, because that is where a person carrying weight puts their foot hardest. She takes the stub of candle from the sill by the trap and does not light it. There is enough coming down from the room to get her to the turn, and past the turn she knows every foot of it, and a candle carried down a cellar stair by a person with a jug in the other hand is a candle that ends up on the floor. The change in the air happens between the 3rd step and the 6th. Above, the room smells used, bodies, straw, tallow smoke, the sour top note of spilled wine warmed all evening by a fire. Down here it is earth first, then cooperage, then the wine itself, and the wine smell in a cellar is nothing like the smell of wine in a cup. It is deeper and slower and has a mineral edge under it, because it is not the wine you are smelling so much as the wood that has held it, and the damp stone that has held the wood. The cold arrives at the same time, and it is a still cold, without any movement in it at all. This cellar is older than the house standing on it. You can see it in the stone if you look, which nobody does. The lower courses are laid differently from the upper, larger blocks, better cut, and there is the beginning of an arch in the north wall that goes nowhere and has been filled. Half the cellars on this island are like this. The city has been rebuilt on top of itself so many times that the ground floor of one century is the cellar of the next, and a woman going down for wine is going down through about 1,000 years, without any part of that being available to her as a thought. What is available to her is that the 4th step is worn, and the north wall sweats in a thaw, and there is a place near the filled arch where the floor is not quite level, and a jug set down there will lean. That is the sum of what the past has handed her about this room, and it is, for her purposes, complete. There are 3 casks on the frame, and one of them is nearly done. She knows which by the sound. You knock the wood with a knuckle along its length, and the note changes where the level is, hollow above and dull below, and the change is not subtle once you have heard it twice. She works down the belly of the near cask with her knuckle, tap, 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 and finds the line about 1/3 up, and that is that decided. The knocking is the loudest thing that has happened in 20 minutes, and it comes back off the vault above her. The jug goes under the tap and she turns the spigot a quarter, and the sound of it is the best sound in the building. There is a moment at the start where the wine comes in a spit and then it finds itself and runs, and the note of it rises steadily as the jug fills. And a person who has done this 1,000 times does not watch the jug at all. She listens. When the note gets to where it gets, she closes the tap, and the last of it drips and stops, and the jug is a finger's width from the top and has been every time for 2 years. Her forearms are cold again down here, and there is nothing to be done about it until she's upstairs. The burn on the inside of her wrist is doing its tight thing. She stands for a moment with the jug on the ledge and rubs the arm with the flat of the other hand hard up and down, and it does what it always does, which is very little. Then she picks the jug up in both hands, close to the body, and starts back up the turn of the stair, feeling for the worn hollows with the ball of the foot. Going up is harder than going down, and always has been, because the light is above and behind the treads, and the treads are therefore in their own shadow, and because the jug is full now, and full changes everything about how a body climbs. She takes it in 2 stages with a pause at the turn, which she would not have needed at 15 and did anyway, having been told to. Up in the room, the keeper has put the shutters to and dropped the bar and is sitting down for the first time since the light went, on the end of the bench, with his bad legs straight out in front of him. He looks at the jug and does not say anything about it. The coals under their pierced iron lid are giving up threads of heat and no light at all now, and the 2 candles are down to their last inch, and doing the thing tallow does at the end, which is to lean and smoke and want putting out. There is a song that gets sung in this room maybe twice a month, when there are enough of them, and they are far enough along, and it has a middle that Isabel knows completely, and an end she has never heard. If you've drifted this far, subscribe and let yourself drift the rest of the way. Back to the story. It is always the same. It starts, and she's at the table or the door or the stair, and by the time the middle comes around she has stopped moving to listen without deciding to, and then there is a jug wanted or a cup down, and she goes, and when she comes back they are talking again. She has asked nobody how it ends. Asking would make it a thing. She sets the jug on the board and takes the cloth and starts the long table again from the far end, because it was wiped before the last two men had finished with it, and is therefore not wiped. The strokes go with the grain. The wood under her hand is worn into a shallow dish along the middle where 100 years of elbows have been, and the cloth catches in the joints, and she works it out with a fingernail through the cloth. Somewhere out on the lane a shutter opens and closes again, quickly, the way a shutter does when someone has looked at the weather and decided against it. The lantern in the upper window across the way is still burning. The room above the dye yard. The courtyard she turns into has a smell in it that survives frost, which very few smells do. Frost flattens a city. It takes the onions and the middens and the horses, and puts them all away until morning, and what is left is stone and iron and wood smoke. A dye yard is not put away by frost. It comes up out of the ground and off the walls and out of the timber of the troughs, a sharp mineral thing underneath, alum and iron, and over the top of it the vegetable stink of woad that has been fermented, which is a smell people describe by comparison, and the comparisons are all unkind. Greel has worked in a yard like this and stopped noticing it inside a fortnight, the way everyone does, and coming back into one after a year away brings it all up at once and then puts it away again in about 4 breaths. The troughs stand along the north wall under a lean-to roof, and they are full, and they are skinned with ice at the edges. Ice on a dye trough is a serious matter, and the yard knows it. Somebody has laid boards over 2 of them, and weighted the boards with stones, and somebody has been out here at some point in the evening with a stick, breaking the skin at the edges and pushing the pieces under. You can see where. The frost around the trough is scuffed, and there is a wet patch that is refrozen glassy, and will take somebody's feet out from under them in the morning if the sun does not get to it first, and the sun does not come into this yard until well after the work starts. She goes up the outside stair with the bolt still on her shoulder. The stair is wood, and it is the noisiest thing she will touch tonight, and she goes up it on the outer edge of the treads where they are screwed to the stringer and do not flex. 11 steps. At the top there is a door with a leather latch string hanging out through a hole, which means the person inside has not pulled it in, which means she is expected. She puts the bolt down on the landing first, standing it on end against the wall before she touches the string, because a door opened with £100 on your shoulder is a door you go through badly. The room is one room, and it is warmer than the yard by very little. There is a brazier, a shallow iron pan on 3 legs with charcoal in it, and charcoal gives heat without smoke, which is the entire reason for it in a room with no chimney. It is not much heat. It is a circle about the width of a table, and outside that circle the room is the temperature of the stair. The woman who lives here is sitting inside the circle, with a distaff under her left arm, and a spindle turning below her right hand, and she does not stop when the door opens, because you do not stop a spindle for a person you know. Her name is Johanna, and she is somewhere near 60, and she has been spinning since before she can remember being anything else. The distaff is a stick as long as her arm with the carded wool wound round the top of it in a soft cone, held under the armpit so the left hand is free. The spindle hangs on the thread below her right hand, turning, dropping slowly toward the floor as the thread lengthens. When it reaches the boards, she winds the new length onto the shaft and sets it going again. That is the whole of it. It has been the whole of it for 4,000 years, and there is nothing in the room that would have surprised a woman doing this on a hillside a very long way from here. The distaff wool is combed rather than carded for this work, drawn through iron teeth until the fibres all lie the same way, and combed wool spun this way gives the smooth, hard thread the drapery wants. Carded wool goes the other direction. The fibres cross and trap air, and the thread comes out soft and warm and hopeless under tension. 2 words, 1 process apart, and the whole character of a cloth decided by which of them was done in a shed 3 weeks ago. There is a wheel in the corner, under a cloth. It is a great wheel, a big spoked thing taller than the woman sitting beside it, with a small spindle mounted horizontally at one end and driven by a cord off the rim, and you spin at it standing, walking backward and forward, one hand on the rim and one drawing the thread out at an angle. It is faster than the drop spindle by a great deal. It is also, by the rules of the drapery, no good for warp. If you've drifted this far, subscribe and let yourself drift the rest of the way. Back to the story. Wheel-spun yarn comes out softer and less tightly twisted than hand-spun, and warp is the thread that goes on the loom under tension and takes all the abuse of the weaving, and a warp that gives is a cloth that fails at the seal house. There is nothing mysterious in the failing. The cloth comes off the loom looking well enough, and then it is fulled, and the fulling takes hold of every weakness in it at once, and what comes out has a thin place or a drawn place or a line running through it that catches the light. Nobody can prove afterward what caused it. Everybody knows. So the wheel does weft and the spindle does warp, and the cloth on Greel's shoulder has both of those things in it, and the reason it has both is written into ordinances in more towns than either woman could name. Johanna does not think of it as a rule. She thinks of it as a fact about thread, the way it is a fact about wood that it splits along the grain, and if you told her it had been argued about by men in a chamber, she would find that neither surprising nor interesting. The wheel is under the cloth because the wheel is loud and the hour is what it is, and the neighbours below are asleep. The spindle turning under her hand has a whirl on it, a disc set on the shaft to give it weight and keep it spinning true, and this one is lead. Greel has wanted a lead one for years. The common ones are fired clay, and they are fine and they chip, and a chipped whirl is off balance, and an off-balance spindle wobbles, and a wobbling spindle puts an uneven twist in the thread, and the unevenness runs the whole length of what you spin that day. Lead does not chip. Lead is also heavier for its size, which means you can have the weight without the width, and a narrower swirl fouls the thread less. All of this is knowledge held in the hands of women who could not tell you a single word of it out loud. You can hear the spindle. That is the surprising part of a room like this. It is not silent work. There is the small dry hiss of the fibres drawing out of the cone on the distaff, and there is a faint whir from the shaft, and every so often there is the tap of the whirl touching the floorboard when the thread has run its length and the spinner has not quite caught it, and then the sound of winding on, which is a soft, rapid slap. Under all of it is the charcoal, which does not crackle the way wood does, but ticks occasionally as it settles, and which is the only thing in the room making light. The light from a brazier is not like the light from a candle. It comes from underneath and from the middle, and it is red rather than yellow, and it does not flicker so much as pulse, and it makes the ceiling a much more interesting place than the floor. Everything in this room above waist height is in the dark. Greel knows there are baskets along the wall, and a bed frame with a straw sack on it, and a shelf with 3 things on it, because she's been in this room in daylight, and none of that is available now, and the room at this hour is a red circle and a great deal of black. She sets the bolt down inside the door and says what she's come to say, which takes very little time. The draper wants 2 more of the same by the end of the week, and there is combed wool in the yard below for it, and the money for the last lot is not coming until the term day. Johanny makes a sound about the term day. It is not a complaint so much as an acknowledgement, the noise you make when a thing you predicted has occurred, and the spindle does not slow at all while she makes it. Greel sits down on the floor at the edge of the circle with her back against the wall and her legs out, and this is the first time she has sat since the middle of the afternoon. Her shoulder registers the change about 10 seconds later, a hot dull spread across the top of it and down into the blade. Her feet do it after that. The particular relief of taking weight off feet that have been carrying for 4 hours is not gratitude, and it is not pleasure. It is closer to a sound the body makes, and it lasts about a minute and then it is gone and the feet are simply feet again. The 2 of them do not talk much. What talk there is goes in short exchanges with long gaps, and the gaps are not awkward and are not being managed by either of them. Johanna says something about the ice on the troughs. Greel says something about the boards. A while later, Johann says something about a man in the yard below who has been coughing for 3 weeks, and Greel says that she heard, and neither of them takes it further, because there is nowhere for it to go, and both of them know exactly where it goes. What Greel wants, sitting there, is oiled parchment. Her own room has a window opening the size of 2 hands, high in the wall, closed with a shutter that fits badly, and the arrangement in winter is a piece of cloth stuffed into the gap and taken out when she needs to see. Oiled parchment in a frame would let a grey light in and keep the weather out. It costs what it costs, and it has to be renewed, and it is the single thing she has wanted for 11 years, and she has come close twice, and both times something else happened, which is the usual history of such a want. She knows the price of it, and has known it for years, and refreshes the figure without meaning to whenever she passes the place that sells it. She has never once mentioned it to another person. It is not a secret. It is simply the sort of want that sounds foolish out loud and is not foolish at all in the room it belongs to. On a January morning, when the cloth comes out of the gap and the light that arrives is the light you have to work by. The frost is getting into the room now through the gap under the door and along the floor, and it comes as a flat cold layer at ankle height that the brazier does not touch. Greel can feel the line of it across her shins. Above the line she is warm on the front and cold on the back, which is the standard arrangement of a body in a room with one heat source, and which is why people in the city sit in a particular way, angled, turning themselves through the evening like something on a spit. Nobody has ever in their life been evenly warm. The idea of a room that is the same temperature in all of its parts is not something anyone here has to reject, because it has not occurred to anyone to want it, and the closest they come is a bed with 2 other people in it. Johanny's hands do not stop. There is a groove on her left thumb in the same place as the one on Greela's, deeper, and the skin of both her hands has the particular quality of hands that have worked greasy wool for a lifetime, which is that they are soft and slightly waxy and do not chap. The lanolin does it. Women who spin unwashed wool have hands better than any ladies in this city, and it is entirely accidental, and nobody has ever thanked the sheep for it. The thread that comes off the spindle is finer than Greel can make and always has been. She has watched this and been slightly annoyed by it for a decade. The difference is not in the fingers, it is in the drawing hand's rhythm and in something about how much fibre is let go at a time, and Johanna cannot explain it and has tried, and the explanation always ends in her holding up her hand and doing it and saying that this is what she does. It is the same answer everyone gives about the thing they are best at. Greel's own thread is good and even and slightly heavier, and it goes into cloth that sells and is sealed and gets no complaint from anyone, and she is entirely aware that she will never close the gap. She stopped trying at about 30. What she did instead was get faster, which is a thing that can be had by working, and she is faster than Jahan now by a margin that neither of them has ever mentioned, and both of them know to the hour. After a while, Greel gets up, which takes 2 movements and a hand on the wall, and takes the empty sack from behind the door for the combed wool below. Johanna says a thing about the stair being icy on the 3rd step from the bottom, and Greel says that she came up it. That is the goodbye. Neither of them marks it. Outside on the landing, the cold takes the whole of her at once, and the yard smell comes up again and is gone again inside 4 breaths. The sky over the courtyard has a hard clarity to it that means the temperature is still falling. Somewhere out beyond the wall a dog starts and thinks better of it. Greel stands on the landing for a moment with one hand on the rail, doing the thing she does at every threshold, letting her eyes go and counting, to a number she does not know she's counting to. Below her the troughs give off their smell into the cold, and the boards on top of them have gone white with frost since she came up. There is combed wool in the shed below and then the long way round to the weigh house. The house on the Rue de Rosiers. The room is at the back of the house on the ground floor, and it has been made ready by people who have done this before. The shutters are closed and a cloth has been hung over them, and another cloth hung over the door, and the effect is not decoration. It is draught. A room with 2 candles and 4 bodies in it will hold a workable warmth as long as nothing moves through it, and the moment a door opens at the wrong time the whole thing goes and takes half an hour to come back. So there are cloths, and a woman stationed near the door whose entire task for the next several hours is to be the person who opens it, so that nobody else opens it. There is a fire, a small one, and it's the only fire in the house that has not been covered tonight, and the household will answer for that if anyone asks, and nobody will ask. Over it there is water in an iron pot, and the water has been kept just off the boil for a long time, and the pot has that particular near silence, a low irregular tick, the sound of something that would sing if you gave it another few minutes and is not being given them. That sound and the fire are the floor of everything that happens in this room tonight. Perrette came in and did 4 things in a fixed order before she took her outer layer off. She looked at the woman, she looked at the fire and the water, she looked at the light, where it was, whether it could be moved, whether there was more of it in the house. And she looked at the other women, 3 of them, and worked out in about the time it takes to cross a room which one was useful, which one was going to be useful once she stopped being frightened, and which one was going to have to be given a task in another part of the building. That last assessment is the one nobody teaches and everybody makes. She got it slightly wrong tonight and corrected inside 10 minutes, which is normal. The one she took for useless turned out to be steady and simply out of her depth, and the one she took for steady has a way of anticipating that is going to have to be managed. Managing it costs about a sentence an hour. Perrette has been spending that sentence since she arrived and will go on spending it until the thing is done, and the woman in question will go home in the morning believing she was a great help, and she will have been. The woman on the bed is younger than Perrette and older than Isabel, and this is not her first. That is a very great deal of information, and Perrette had it before she was through the door, because the woman who came to fetch her said it in the street. It changes what Perrette expects, what she prepares, and how much of the night she has budgeted. A first birth is a long, unhurried arithmetic that can go on into a second day. A third is faster and more sudden, and can turn over without much warning, and the thing to be ready for is not tedium but speed. So the linen came out of the bag at once and went on the chest where she can reach it without standing. The shears came out and were unbound and set down with the blades apart. The cup came out. None of this was done with any visible urgency, because a midwife moving quickly is a signal that goes around a room in under a second and cannot be taken back, and everything Perrette does in the first 10 minutes of a birth is done at a pace chosen to be watched. Somebody goes round the room and opens things. This is not superstition being humoured. It is done briskly and by everyone and without comment. The chest at the foot of the bed is unlocked and its lid put up. The shutters are unbarred behind their cloth, though not opened. The knots in the bedcords are loosened. The woman on the bed has her hair unbound and her sleeves untied, and there is nothing on her that is fastened. The idea underneath it is old and simple and entirely coherent on its own terms. Nothing in this house is to be closed while something is trying to come open. Perrette has watched this done in perhaps 200 rooms and has never once told anyone not to. It costs a minute. It gives the women in the rooms something to do with their hands in the part of the night where there is nothing to do, and doing nothing is the hardest thing on offer. Whether she believes it is not a question she has ever put to herself in those terms. What she believes is that a room in which 4 people have just moved purposefully around, opening things, is a better room to work in than a room in which 4 people have been standing still. And she would say that if pressed, and she is never pressed. There are other things in the same family. A stone to be held. A girdle of written words borrowed from a house that keeps one and passed round the quarter for a fee. She has seen all of them, and has never argued with any of them, and has quietly kept her hands doing what her hands do underneath, and in 30 years no household has ever noticed the division. The light is 2 tallow candles and the fire, and she has moved one candle onto a stool at the level of the bed, and left the other where it was. Tallow at close range gives you enough. It gives you colour, roughly, and shape, and it does not give you detail at any distance beyond your own reach, which is why almost all of what she does with her hands. Her hands are her instrument in a way that is not a figure of speech. She has been reading the progress of a birth through the palms and fingers for 30 years, and she can do it in complete darkness and has had to, twice. The ache in them is worse in here than it was outside, which surprises her, because she had assumed the cold was the whole of it. Warmth has come into the fingers, and the ache has come with it, and settled into the joints at the base of each finger and the base of the thumb. She flexes them slowly under the cloth on her lap where nobody's looking. There is grease in the bag. She works a little of it in while she's talking to the woman on the bed about nothing in particular, and it helps the skin and does nothing for the joint, and she knew that before she started. The talking is most of the job for a long stretch, not instruction. Instruction is about 11 sentences in total, and she will use them all in the last part. The rest is a low, continuous, unremarkable conversation about the neighbours, and the frost, and a cousin in melon, conducted at a volume that requires the woman on the bed to stay slightly attentive, and its purpose is to keep her from going somewhere inside her own head, where the pain gets larger. Perrette learned this from the woman who trained her, who never explained it, and who talked to her mothers about vegetables for 30 years. Tonight it is a cousin in melon, and a dispute about a garden strip and whether the man who has the strip is entitled to the pear tree on the boundary of it, and Perrette has no view on the pear tree and has developed one over the last hour for the sake of the argument. The woman on the bed has a strong view. She returns to it between everything else, and each time she returns to it she comes back out of wherever she'd gone, which is the entire purpose of the pear tree. If you've drifted this far, subscribe and let yourself drift the rest of the way. Back to the story. There is a thing she's supposed to do, and she has been putting it off. In extremity, when it is going badly, when it looks as though the mother may not come through, a sworn midwife of this city is expected to ask her, in front of the women present, who the father of the child is, and to say afterward what she was told. The answer is taken seriously. It has weight in front of a court, because a woman in that condition is held not to be lying, and a name given in that room can settle a question of maintenance or inheritance that would otherwise go nowhere. It is a rule made by men who thought about it carefully, and it does what it was designed to do, and Perrette has used it, twice, and both times the child was provided for afterward in a way it would not otherwise have been. It is also, considered from inside the room, an instrument aimed at the worst moment of a person's life. She has known midwives who asked early and often because the asking was in their oath, and they were literal women. She asks late, and once, and only when she's certain, and she has never in 30 years asked a question she did not already believe she would need the answer to. She has thought about the difference between those two practices more than she has thought about almost anything else in her working life, and she has never discussed it with another midwife, and she's fairly sure that most of them have thought about it too, and have also never discussed it. It is not the kind of thing that gets said aloud in a trade. It gets decided once, privately, early, and then carried. Tonight she will not need it. She knows that within the first hour, from the hands and from the colour and from a general quality in the room she could not put into words if she tried, and knowing it changes her breathing without changing anything else she does. She sits back on the stool. The pot ticks. The woman near the door has her arms folded and is looking at the floor and has settled into the particular patient slump of somebody who has understood that this is going to take all night and that this is good news. You're sitting in the corner where the cold from the shutters comes down the wall and pools. The floor is beaten earth with rushes over it, swept back from the bed into a bank against the wall. Everything smells of tallow and wet wool and iron, and under all of it the sharp, clean smell of the water in the pot, which is the smell of a room that has been made as clean as this century knows how to make one. Nobody has washed their hands in anything but water, and nobody will, and the water is hot, and that is not nothing. Nobody in this room could tell you why hot water and clean linen make a difference, and every experienced woman in it is certain that they do, on the evidence of rooms where they were not to be had. The certainty runs about 2 centuries ahead of the explanation. It is held in the same way as the rule about warp and weft, as a fact about how the world behaves, learned from outcomes and passed down without a mechanism attached to it. The hours in this room do not pass by any measure Perrette uses elsewhere. They pass by the candle going down and by the fire wanting a stick, and by the woman on the bed going from talking to not talking, and back to talking again. There is a long middle where nothing at all happens for what feels like a great while, and one of the women falls asleep sitting up and is not woken, and the one who was frightened has stopped being frightened, which is what always happens if you simply give them enough time and something to hold. Outside the shutter, at some point, there are footsteps going up the street and stopping and going on. 2 men, unhurried, and a stave end knocking once on the stone. The room hears them and pays no attention. Whatever is out there tonight is on the other side of a wall and a cloth, and every person in this room has a reason to be here that would survive any question that could be asked of it, and the footsteps go away up the hill and take about a minute to do it. Perrette gets up and moves the candle and sits down again. Her knees do the thing knees do. She has a way of standing up now that puts the work through the outside of the thigh instead of the front, and she developed it about 4 years ago without noticing that she was developing it, and she is aware of it tonight for the first time in a while, and files the awareness away with the hands. 3 winters, perhaps 4. The arithmetic is not frightening and does not feel like an ending. It feels like the sort of thing she would take into account if she were planning a journey, a matter of what can be got done between here and a fixed point, and the only item on the list is a girl of 15 who held a light steadily in 3 rooms and asked one exact question afterward on 2 occasions. When it comes fast as she had expected, and the instructions are the 11 sentences and they are said flat and in order, and not one of them is raised. The room narrows to the bed and the 2 candles. There is a great deal of breath in it and very little noise, and afterward there is the sound everybody in the room has been waiting for, and then the sound of 4 women all letting go of something at once, which is not a sound with a name. The cord is tied twice and cut between the ties. The child is wiped and wrapped, and the linen strips go round in the way they go round, firm and even, from the feet upward. It is a small, ordinary, competent business, and it takes some minutes, and Perette's hands do all of it while her attention is somewhere else entirely, on the mother, watching for the second part of the work that is still to come, and that nobody in the room but her is thinking about yet. Afterward there is water, and there is the pot off the fire, and there is a stretch of quiet housekeeping that goes on much longer than anyone outside such a room would guess. The fire gets a stick. The cloths come down off the shutters and go up over a line. The woman who was frightened has taken charge of the sweeping, and is doing it too thoroughly. The candle on the stool is down to the last of itself, and Perrette pinches it rather than letting it gutter, and the room drops to firelight and stays there. She sits down on the stool with her hands in her lap and lets her back curve, which is a thing she does not do in front of people, and is doing now because everyone in the room has stopped looking at her. The fire settles. Somewhere above, in the house, somebody's being told, and their feet go across a floor. It will be a while yet before she's out on the street again, and the street will have changed by then. The shutters coming down. The shutters on this house are outside shutters, hung on strap hinges and closed by pulling them in against the frame from within and dropping a bar across, and they do not fit. None of them fit. They were made for the window, and then the frame moved, because everything in a timber house moves, and the gaps have been dealt with over the years by wedging rags in them, and by nailing a strip of leather along one edge, and by a general acceptance that a room is going to be draughty. Isabel goes round them with the flat of her hand, feeling along the joins for the places where the cold is coming through hardest, and stuffs a twist of cloth into the 2 worst. It makes a difference of very little, and it makes it immediately, and the whole business takes as long as it takes to say. The last thing is the hoop. It comes off its pin above the lintel and goes inside behind the door because a hoop left out overnight in a hard frost swells and splits, and a hoop that has split is a hoop that has to be replaced, and there is no money in this house for hoops. She takes it down by reaching up and lifting and turning her wrist, and the movement is one she could do asleep, and the iron pin is so cold that touching it is briefly indistinguishable from touching something hot. She brings her fingers to her mouth without thinking about it, and stands in the doorway for a moment with the hoop in the other hand, looking up the lane. The lane is completely dark and not quiet. Those 2 things go together in a way that people who have only known lit streets find difficult. When you take the light out, what is left is a great deal of sound with nothing attached to it. A scrape from somewhere above and behind, a settling somewhere left. Water moving in a gutter 40 paces off with a small regular tick where it goes over a stone. In daylight none of this exists because in daylight there are carts and criers and 1,100 people between here and the corner. The city at this hour is not empty. It has simply gone from being a thing you look at to a thing you listen to, and the ear has to learn a whole street over again from nothing. She has been listening to this one for 2 years. She knows that the scrape is a loose board on the gallery of the house 2 along, and that the settling is the frost getting into a stack of timber in the yard behind, and that the water in the gutter is coming from a pipe that has never worked properly and floods a doorway in every rain. None of this is knowledge she would call knowledge. It is the same category as knowing the height of the beam. When she hears something that is not on the list, and it happens perhaps twice a month, her body knows before she does, and she is inside with the door shut before she has finished having the thought. Nothing has ever come of any of them. Twice it was a cat on the gallery. Once it was a man being sick against the far wall at length with pauses. Once it was 2 people arguing in a doorway in a register so low and so practised that she understood, standing there with the bucket in her hand, that they had been having exactly that argument for years. She went in and shut the door on it, and it was still going when she came out again. Tonight, there is a thing on the list that she has not heard for a week or 2, and it is the watch. It arrives as a rhythm first, from the direction of the cathedral end. 2 sets of footsteps that are not in step, and a third sound underneath them which is a stave butt coming down on the stone every 4th or 5th pace. Not a signal, just a man walking with a stick and letting it drop, It is unhurried in a way that tells you a great deal about the entire enterprise, and Isabel puts the hoop down inside the threshold and pulls the door to until it is a finger's width. There are two kinds of watch in this city, and they do not do the same thing. There is the sitting watch, which is men posted at fixed places, at gates, at the bridgeheads, at certain corners, who stand there all night doing nothing at all unless something happens in front of them. And there is the walking watch, which goes round, on a circuit, through the streets, and is the one you hear coming. The sitting watch you can plan for because it does not move, and everyone knows where it is. The walking watch you cannot, and so what people do instead is listen, which is what the whole quarter is doing right now without any of them being aware that they are. Behind every shutter on this street there is somebody half awake who would be able to tell you in the morning if it occurred to anybody to ask, roughly when the watch went by, and would not be able to tell you how they knew. It is the same faculty that wakes a mother when a child's breathing changes. The city is full of it, and nobody has a name for it, and it is the single most widely held skill in Paris. The men on it are not soldiers. The city runs its watch partly on paid men and partly on the trades, and the trades take it in turn, so many men a night from this craft and so many from that, and the whole arrangement is set out in the statutes along with a list of the crafts that are excused. The list is fought over constantly. Being excused is worth real money, because a man who has stood all night is a man who works badly the next day, and every guild in the city has an argument prepared about why it should be on the list and none of the others should. The arguments are about the nature of the work, that it begins before dawn, that it cannot be interrupted, that it requires the hands to be steady, that the craft is small and cannot spare a man. They are written down and preserved and argued in front of the provost, and settled and reopened, and the whole apparatus is a slow public negotiation about whose night belongs to them and whose belongs to the city. One of the excused trades is the bakers, and the reason for that is the reason that matters tonight. The bakers are excused because the bakers are working. The same body of statutes that forbids craft after dark, on the grounds that candlelight cannot produce good and loyal work, makes a specific and unembarrassed exception for the men who have to have bread in the city by morning. Dough does not care about a bell. It has to be set and it has to rise, and it has to be in the oven at an hour that is fixed by the dough and not by the provost. So there are men awake within 4 streets of this door in cellars and back rooms, with fires going and lights lit and doors that will be open to a delivery, and every one of them is entirely within the law. Isabel can smell it faintly when the air moves the right way, which it does about once an hour. Not bread, because it is too early for bread, but wood smoke of a particular kind, the smoke of an oven being brought up rather than a hearth being kept alive. It is a smell with warmth in it even at 100 paces, and it is the only comfortable thing in the street tonight, and it belongs to men. That is the whole shape of the thing, and it does not require anybody to have been cruel. The exception exists. It was written by people who thought about the problem clearly and solved it. They simply did not, when they were listing the work that has to happen after dark, come to the wine that must be carried up, or the cups that must be gathered, or the cloth that must be at the seal house by opening, or the child that is coming on the far bank. Those are not trades in the sense the statute means. There is nobody to send a man to the watch on behalf of the women doing them, because there is no body to send him. There are women's crafts in this city with sworn statutes of their own, in silk and in gold thread, with mistresses and apprentices and a written rule, and those women could and did argue in front of the provost about wages and terms and the treatment of girls. What none of them could do is argue about the hour, because the hour is not a matter of craft. It belongs to the ordinance about householders, and there is no craft anywhere that has standing to reopen that. The footsteps come level with the top of the lane and do not turn down it. Isabel hears the stave butt go past the mouth of the street and continue along the frontage, and the rhythm changes slightly where the paving gives out, and then it is going away, and the interval between the strikes is stretching. She waits until she cannot hear it at all, and then waits about as long again, which she was not taught and worked out, and then she brings the door to, and drops the bar, and stands with her forehead almost against the wood. Behind her the room has gone to almost nothing. The 2 candles are out. The coals are under their lid. What light there is comes up through the pierced holes in threads and lands on the underside of the beam and nowhere else, and the room is a black box with a faint red pattern on its ceiling. It is the warmest it has been since the fire was covered, because a covered fire gives up its heat slowly and steadily, and the room has had an hour to fill with it, and it is also the least useful light in the building. The keeper has gone up. She heard him on the stair a while ago, one tread at a time with the bad leg leading, and heard him cross the floor above and heard the rope bed take him. If you've drifted this far, subscribe and let yourself drift the rest of the way. Back to the story. He will be asleep within a few minutes. He always is. Isabel's own place is a straw sack in the corner of that same upper room, at the far end, behind a hanging, and the arrangement is entirely ordinary and would not have struck anyone in this city as worth a remark. Privacy is a thing nobody here has ever had, and therefore nobody here has ever missed. She has slept in a room with other people in it every night of her life. In her mother's house there were 5 of them across 2 sacks and a bed, and the sound of other people breathing is not to her a thing to be endured but the ordinary condition of a room at night, and the 2 months when she slept alone after she came here and before the keeper's cousin arrived were the worst 2 months she has had. You watch her do the last of it in the dark, which is not difficult and which she prefers. The cloths go over the rail by the fire so they are dry in the morning. The bucket goes upside down on the flags. The straw on the floor gets a rough pull about with her foot to bring the flat-trodden part of it up, and she finds a cup in it with the side of her shoe, which is the 4th this month, and she picks it up and puts it on the board with the others and thinks nothing about it whatsoever. The straw is due. It has been down since the autumn, and it should have been changed at Martimas and was not, and by now the bottom of it has gone to something like a dark felt, and the smell of it in a warm room is unmistakable. It gets changed when the keeper decides it gets changed, and the deciding is about the price of straw and about the fact that the changing is a whole day of 2 people's work, and it will happen in a fortnight or it will happen in a month, and either way it will not be Isabel who chooses. When it does happen, she will be the one on the shovel and the one carrying it out in armfuls to the cart, and there will be things in it that have been lost since November, and the room afterward will smell of nothing for about 4 days, and those 4 days are, though she has never put it this way, among the few she looks forward to. She sits down on the end of the bench with her back against the wall and her feet flat and lets her hands lie palm up on her thighs. This is not rest exactly, and it is the closest thing to it in the day. Her forearms are warm again, finally, or at least no longer cold, and the burn on the wrist has stopped announcing itself, and there is a general spreading heaviness coming up from the feet that she is not going to fight. The threads of red on the beam do not move. The house makes its noises and settles. The song comes into her head, the middle of it, which is the part she has. It runs the way it always runs, 4 lines and then the turn and then 4 more, and then it arrives at the place where she's never been and simply stops, and there is nothing on the other side of the stop, not even a guess. She's tried to make one up and it comes out sounding like the middle again. She lets it go round twice and then lets it go. Outside the shutter she can hear the frost. Not a sound the frost makes, the sounds it causes. A creak from the timber of the house next door as it contracts, and after a while another one, and then, from further off, the small hard crack of a puddle giving somewhere under its own ice. Across the lane and 1 story up, the light in the window is still there. It will go out before morning, and she will not be awake to see it. The night is long and there is no hurry in any of it. If you're drifting now, let yourself go. Subscribe so the next story is waiting when you return. Sleep well. The Wayhouse Door. The sack of combed wool rides differently from the bolt. It is lighter, and it is soft and it moves, and the moving is the problem because a soft load shifts a ½ inch every time your foot comes down, and a ½ inch every time compounds over 1,000 paces into a shoulder that has been fighting all night. Greel has it on the same side as the bolt was, and has taken the neck of it in her fist and twisted, which locks the mass into a shape and makes it behave. The twist has to be renewed about every 2 streets. She does it without breaking her stride, a hitch of the wrist and a small shrug, and the sack goes quiet again. The wool smells. Combed wool smells of sheep and of the grease still in it, and of the shed it has been standing in, and it is a warm smell in a cold street, and it is the reason she does not mind this part of the carrying. There is also, underneath, a sourness that comes from the scouring, and the scouring is done with stale urine. It is collected. There are households in this city that keep a pot for it and sell it on, and the men who come for it are a recognised sort of person with a recognised sort of cart, and everyone knows what the cart is for and nobody makes anything of it. Urine kept until it goes to ammonia will lift grease out of wool the way nothing else available will. Every part of the cloth on that shoulder an hour ago had been through it. The fleece scoured, the wool combed, the thread spun, the cloth woven and then fulled, trodden or beaten in a trough with water and fuller's earth until the fibres locked and the cloth shrank in on itself and came out a third smaller and twice the thing it was. Fulling is the stage that turns a woven fabric into a woolen cloth, and it is loud and wet and heavy, and it is where the failures show. The whole long chain of it, from the animal to the bolt, has passed through perhaps 9 pairs of hands, and the majority of those hands belong to women, and none of that is a thing anyone in the chain has ever counted. The weaving is the part with a man at it more often than not, and the weaver's name is the one that attaches to the piece, and that is not a conspiracy either. It is where the loom is, and the loom is the expensive object, and the expensive object is owned. Everything upstream of the loom happens in rooms with no expensive object in them, done by whoever is in the room, and it happens at whatever hour the room is free. The weighhouse is not open and will not be for hours, and that is exactly the point. Greel's business tonight is to be at the door before the door is anything, so that when the men who run it arrive in the grey, there is already a bolt of cloth on the step with the draper's mark on the wrapper, and it goes into the first batch instead of the fourth. The difference between the first batch and the fourth is a full day. There is no rule that says first come is first sealed, and there does not need to be, because that is simply how a queue behaves everywhere and always has. There will be 4 or 5 of them on this step by first light, and Greel knows most of them by sight, and one of them by name. They do not talk much. The arrangement between people waiting outside a door in the cold before dawn is understood without being discussed anywhere in the world, and it is that you acknowledge each other, establish the order, and then leave one another entirely alone. What happens inside that building is a measuring and a sealing. The cloth is unrolled and drawn over a fixed rod, and its length is taken, and its breadth is taken, and both of those have to come to a standard that is written down, because a bolt of a given name is supposed to be a bolt of a given size, and a merchant in another country buying by the name has to be able to trust the name. Then it is looked at by a man whose whole trade is looking at cloth, in the best light the building has, which is why the building has large windows on the north side and why none of this can be done at any other hour of the day. He runs it over a bar and across his hand. He is finding thin places and drawn places and a slub and any line where a warp thread has been joined badly. Then, if it passes, a small disc of lead is folded through the selvage at the end and struck. The seal is 2 thin lead discs joined by a strip, folded over the edge of the cloth through a hole, and pressed in a die so that the 2 faces come together and take an impression. Once it is on, it cannot come off without cutting the cloth or breaking the lead, and either of those is visible to anyone who looks at the end of the bolt. What is stamped on it is the town, and often the year, and a mark for the grade. It weighs almost nothing. It travels with that cloth for as long as the cloth is a bolt across the sea, through 4 hands, into a warehouse in a city Greel will never see. She has held them. There is a box of the failures somewhere in the weighhouse, seals that were struck badly or folded wrong, and one of the men gave her one once for no reason she could work out, and she kept it for a while in the bottom of a bag, and then it went the way small objects go. The face of it had been squashed on one side. She remembers the weight, which was surprising, and the way it was warm from his hand and then very quickly was not. She has thought about it since, occasionally, in the way you think about a small unexplained kindness from a person you barely know, and has never arrived at anything. He was not flirting. He was not apologizing for anything. He had a box of ruined seals, and a woman was standing there, and he gave her one, and that is very probably the entire content of the event. The street she's on now runs between high blank walls for a long stretch, and this is the piece of the route she likes least and kept anyway, because the alternative had 2 blind corners in it. The wall on the left belongs to a religious house, and has no opening in it at all for the length of a bow shot. The wall on the right is the backs of houses, and they have no openings either, because nobody puts a window in the back of a house on a lane like this. So there are no doorways for 40 paces, and there is nothing to do about that except go through it at the same pace as everywhere else, which she does. The cold in this stretch is a still cold. There is no draught between the walls, and the air has simply sat there since the light went, getting colder, and walking into it is like walking into water of a slightly different temperature. Her breath is not showing. It has not shone all night, and it will not because the air is too dry for it, and the absence of it is one of the small things that makes a hard frost feel different from an ordinary cold night. You go through it, leaving nothing behind you at all. Halfway along there is a place where the wall on the left is patched with different stone for about 3 yards, low down, and the patch is old and mossy, and its top edge is uneven. Greela has never wondered about it. It is a landmark and nothing else. When she's level with the patch, she's 2/3 of the way down the stretch, and there are 11 paces to the corner after that. She keeps a great many measurements like this, and has never once thought of them as a system, and if the city were to move a wall she would be lost for a week, and then she would have a new set. Around the corner the street opens out, and there is the smell of an oven being brought up quite close, and a strip of light along the bottom of a cellar door. She goes past it on the far side. There is no danger in a baker, and the baker would not care, and she goes past on the far side anyway, out of the same habit that chose this route, and she notes the light and the smell and files them, and is gone. The sky over the open part is enormous and completely clear, and full of the kind of stars a city with lit streets will never see again. Nobody looks up. There is no reason to look up, and there is every reason to look at the ground, which is uneven and frozen, and has a rut across it at the wrong angle. Greel looks up anyway, once, briefly for no purpose, and then puts her eyes back down. The sky over this quarter is the same sky she looked at over the water at Bruges as a child, and she's not thinking about that, and it is there anyway, in the way things are. The stars over water behave differently. They come down to a horizon instead of stopping at a roofline, and there is a great deal more of them for that reason, and a child lying on her back on a quay has the whole of it. In a street like this one, there is a ribbon of sky the width of a cart and about 9 stars in it, and they change as you walk. She misses the sea in a manner that has become almost entirely detached from the sea. What she has is a set of sensations without a place attached, a particular slap and suck of water against timber, a smell that is salt and tar and rotting weed together, and a quality of light coming off flat water on a grey day that makes everything look further away than it is. She was 11 when she came. She has been here 23 years, which is longer, and the 23 years have not laid anything down that answers to those 3 things. The way house is on the corner of a small square with a well in the middle of it, and a stone trough. The building is stone at the bottom and timber above, and there is a great door with a smaller door in it and a step, and above the step a projecting hood on brackets that keeps the rain off, and the underside of the hood is exactly the shape of shelter that a person waiting all night wants. Greel has waited here before. She knows which corner of the step is out of the draught, and which is not. She sets the sack down against the wall and then the bolt, which she's been carrying with the sack for the last stretch in a compound arrangement that has been ruining her back, and the moment both of them are on the ground her whole upper body reorganizes itself. The shoulder comes up and back, the neck lengthens. There is a distinct audible thing that happens between 2 of the vertebrae, and it is entirely satisfactory. Then she stands there, flexing the fist that has been twisting the sack neck for an hour and getting the blood back into it. The hand comes back in stages, and the last stage is the least pleasant, a hot prickling through the palm and out into 3 of the fingers, and she stands through it with her arm hanging and her fist opening and closing slowly. By the time it has finished, her shoulder has started, and the shoulder takes considerably longer and does not have a finish, and she will still be aware of it at noon tomorrow. She's not going to sit yet. Sitting on stone in this temperature is a thing to be delayed as long as possible, and then done with something between you and the step, and she has a folded piece of sacking for it in the bottom of the wool sack, and she put it there this afternoon. That is the whole of her preparation for the night, and it took her about 4 seconds, and it is the difference between arriving at the grey stiff and arriving at the grey able to walk. The square is silent in a way the streets are not because it is open, and there is nothing close enough to make a noise. The well has a frame over it and a rope on a roller, and the rope moves very slightly in an air current that is otherwise undetectable, and it makes the smallest possible periodic creak at long intervals, without any pattern. It is the only sound. Greel stands with her back against the door and her arms folded inside her outer layer, and listens to it and does not find it tedious. The frost has done the trough. There is a lid of ice on it, a finger thick with a dark hole, where somebody broke through earlier, and it has closed again thinner. In the morning a boy will come and break it with the back of an axe, and everyone will hear it 4 streets away. That is the first sound of the day in this square, and always has been, before the bells, and it is the sound this whole quarter uses to know that the night is finished. If you've drifted this far, subscribe and let yourself drift the rest of the way. Back to the story. She takes the sacking out and folds it double and sits down on the step in the corner out of the draught, with her back against the timber and her knees up and the bolt beside her where she can feel it against her hip. There are hours of this, and she has done it before, and the doing of it is easier than the anticipating. The water stare. She comes out of the house into a street that has changed temperature since she went in. It has dropped, and it has dropped past the point where the cold is a matter of the air, and into the point where it is a matter of the ground, and you can feel the difference through the soles. Earlier the frozen mud gave slightly under a heel. Now it does not give at all. It rings faintly when a shoe comes down on it flat, a small hard note that a street of soft ground never makes, and the whole quarter has acquired a resonance it does not have on any other kind of night. Perrette stands on the step for a moment with the door shut behind her. There is a stage after a birth, walking out, where the body has not yet been told that the work has stopped, and the correct thing to do about it is nothing, for about the length of 30 breaths, in the cold, on a step. She has done this after every birth of her working life and has never explained it to anyone and would call it, if pushed, getting her coat straight. Her hands are shaking very slightly. They always do. It passes by the end of the street. What is underneath it is not fear and not relief, because there was nothing tonight to be frightened of and nothing to be relieved about. It is closer to the state of a person who has been holding something heavy at arm's length for a long time and has put it down, and whose arm goes on believing for a while that the weight is still there. She has watched the same tremor in the hands of women who have been in the room with her, afterward, in the doorway, and has never mentioned it to any of them either. Her bag is lighter by the linen and by most of the grease, and heavier by nothing, because she was paid nothing, and will be paid at the term, and the household knows it and she knows it. And there was a moment at the door where the woman's husband began to say something about it, and Perrette finished the sentence for him, so that he did not have to. That is a courtesy she extends to everybody, and it costs her nothing, and it is the reason she is sent for in this quarter more than anyone else. Payment for this work happens the way payment for most work in this city happens, which is late and in parts and sometimes in something other than coin. She's been paid in firewood, in a mended shoe, in 6 weeks of somebody's daughter coming to sweep, and once, memorably, in a goose that had to be carried home alive and objected all the way. The arrangement runs on the fact that everybody involved expects to still be living on the same 4 streets in 10 years. She goes downhill. Downhill is a different set of muscles, and after a night sitting on a stool it is the worst set, and she takes the steep part with a hand along the wall, which she did not need to do 5 years ago. The wall is stone, and the stone is colder than the air by a clear margin, and her palm comes away from it after each contact with a small reluctance, and she stops doing it about halfway down, and manages the rest with her arms out slightly for balance, and her feet turned a few degrees outward. The bridge gate will be shut. She knew that when she came over, and she has known it all night, and it has been sitting quietly at the back of the arrangement she made with herself about how the night would go. The gates at the ends of both bridges are barred at some point after the bell, and after that a person on the wrong bank is on the wrong bank until morning, unless they have another way, and there are other ways, and everybody who works at night knows what they are, and none of them are written in any ordinance. The gates are not there to stop her, and were not designed with her in mind. They are there because a walled city with open gates at night is not a walled city, and because there are tolls to be collected, and because the men who hold the bridgeheads are holding the 2 most defensible points in Paris. That she is on the wrong side of one is a consequence of an arrangement that has nothing whatever to do with her, which is the ordinary condition of most of her nights. The other way is the water. The Seine is not a barrier in this city so much as a road with different rules, and it is worked by a body of men with a very old privilege, the merchants of the water, who hold the trade of the river, and have held it for longer than anyone can account for, back into a time before the city had a shape you would recognize. Their emblem is a ship. It is the emblem of the whole city, carved on gates and painted on standards, and the reason the city's sign is a boat is that the river was the reason there was a city here at all. What that means practically at this hour is that there are boats on the bank that belong to men whose right to be on the water is not something a gatekeeper can interfere with. It does not mean the men are awake. Most of them are not. What there is instead is one or two who have worked out that a person who needs to cross after the gates are shut will pay for it, and who sleep in their boat 2 nights in 3, and who wake for a particular kind of footstep on the stair. It is a small living, and it is not a secret, and nobody is doing anything wrong. The right to be on the water is theirs, the water is not closed, and a man carrying a person across a river in a boat that belongs to him is not an offence anybody has ever thought to name. The whole of the difficulty in this city at this hour is on the land. The water stair is a flight of stone steps going down from the quay into the river, and there are several of them along both banks, and they are among the oldest things in Paris that anyone touches daily. They are worn into curves. The top 4 are dry, and the next 3 are damp and green, and are to be treated as though they were oiled, and below that they go into the water at whatever level the water is, and the level tonight is low, which is normal for a hard frost because the water is being held upstream as ice. That is a thing the boatmen know and talk about, and the rest of the city does not, that a hard frost drops the river before it does anything else, and that the drop is the warning, and that when the thaw comes, the whole of what has been held comes down at once with the ice in it, and goes at the piers of the bridges. It is how the small bridge has been lost more than once, not by the freeze, by the end of it. You go down them behind her. The handrail is a rope through iron rings, slack, and it is wet, and it is the last thing in this city you would want to grip and the only thing there is. The sound changes as you descend. Up on the quay, there is the whole open night. 4 steps down the quay wall has cut off everything from behind and above, and the river, which has been a background all night, comes up and becomes the only thing there is. A heavy continuous sliding close, with a knock and a slap under it where the water works at the stone. There is ice at the edge, not on the current, which is moving too fast, but along the margin where the water goes quiet against the stair, a shelf of it a hand's breadth out from the step, grey and slightly domed, with the black water running past it. It creaks. That is the sound that surprises people who have not heard it. River ice at the edge of a stair does not crack. It creaks, slowly, as the level moves under it, like a door in another room. The boat is there, and the man in it is asleep under a cover and wakes at about the 3rd step from the bottom, which is where everybody's foot makes the same noise. He does not sit up. He says something short. She says something short back. There is no negotiation about the price because the price has not changed in 11 years, and both of them know it. And she puts the coin into his hand rather than dropping it, because dropping it in a boat at night means someone is going to be feeling about in the bilge with a lamp. Getting into a boat with hands that ache is a specific problem, and she has a specific solution, which is to sit down on the gunwale first, both hands flat behind her, and swing the legs in. It looks ungainly, and she stopped caring about how it looks somewhere in her 40s. The boat takes her weight and moves and settles. The man puts the cover back over his knees and takes up a single oar over the stern and does not hurry, and the boat comes off the stair with a scrape and a small suck and turns into the current. The crossing is not long, and it is the only part of her night that happens in the open. Out here the sky's enormous, and the 2 banks are low black shapes with nothing lit on either of them, and the bridges are upstream, and you can see them only as a heavier darkness with a broken edge where the houses stand on them. There is no reflection to speak of. Reflections want a light to reflect, and there is none. What the water gives back is the faintest grey off the sky, moving, and the black shape of the boat and the 2 people in it eating a hole in the middle of it. The cold on the water is the worst of the night and lasts about 4 minutes. It comes off the surface and up, and it goes through cloth in a way that the cold in the street does not, and both of them sit through it, in the way of people who have decided in advance that it is going to be 4 minutes. The oar makes a sound at the stern each stroke, a soft wooden groan in the notch and then the pull, and the ice at the far margin gets closer, and the creaking starts again from that side. This crossing is not in any record and never was. It is worth being exact about which things are and which are not, because the gap is not where people assume. The court at the Châtelet kept a register of its criminal business in these very years, and that register survives, and it is full of women, their names, the streets they lived in, the trades they followed, what they said, what was said about them, word for word taken down by a clerk. A woman in this city could be extremely thoroughly recorded. What it took was for something to have gone wrong. That is the whole shape of the archive, and it is not a conspiracy either. Writing was expensive and slow and was done for a reason, and the reasons were property, obligation, offence, and salvation. A crossing made for a coin between two people who had made it 400 times before produces nothing to write about under any of those four heads. So Perrette is in the record twice, once for a christening and once for a lease, and the rest of a working life of some 35 years is not anywhere, and neither is the boatman's, and neither is the crossing. The same is true of the other two women tonight and of several thousand more between here and the wall. It is not that they were forbidden the record. It is that the record was never a description of a city. It was a set of instruments for settling arguments, and a night in which no argument occurs leaves the paper blank, and most nights are that night. The far stair comes up under the bow, and the man puts a hand on the stone to hold them, and she does the sitting manoeuvre in reverse, which is harder, and stands on the third step with the rope in her fist. He is already pushing off. There is no exchange at the end of it. The boat goes out and turns and is a shape and then is a sound and then is not distinguishable from the river, and Perrette goes up the steps one at a time with the green ones treated as though they were oiled. The island at the top is asleep and smells of it. There is a compound smell that a city gives off at this hour that it does not give off at any other, and it is banked fires and cold stone and the river and faintly, from the tanner's side when the air moves, something that has been part of the smell of this place for 400 years. It arrives and goes. The frost is on everything now, on the ropes, on the mooring rings, on the flat top of the quay wall, a fine white nap that shows nothing until you put a hand on it and take the hand away. She stands at the top with her back to the water and lets her breathing come back down. The ache in her hands has become simply a fact about her hands, no longer arriving, no longer worsening, just present, the way the river is present. She flexes them once and puts them into her sleeves. The way home from here goes along under the cloister wall, and she will take it slowly, because there is no longer anything at the other end of the night that needs her. The long table, wiped. She wakes because the room above has gone cold, which is what happens in the hour before it gets light, and because a body that has slept 4 hours in its clothes on a straw sack wakes on its own at about the same point every night regardless of what anyone would prefer. There is no light at all. The hanging is a slightly different black from the rest of the black. Isabel lies for a while under 2 layers of blanket and a cloak with her knees drawn up, and listens to the keeper breathing at the far end, and there is nothing on her mind and nothing waiting to arrive on it. Getting up in a room with no fire is a matter of technique. You do it in one movement, from lying to standing, because any intermediate stage is a stage in which the blanket is off you and you are not yet moving, and that stage is the miserable one. She is up and has the cloak round her, and is at the stairhead in about the time it takes to describe, and her feet find the top tread by themselves. The stair is a boxed one, steep, more ladder than stair, and she goes down it backward with both hands on the rail, which everyone in this house does and nobody has ever said aloud. The room below still has heat in it, not much, and it is all in a band at about knee-height around the covered fire, and she stands in it for a moment with the cloak held open, which is a thing she does every morning and has never once been observed doing. Then she lifts the iron lid off the coals and finds them still red at the centre, which is the whole point of the lid, and she feeds them small stuff off the pile until there is a flame, and the room comes back into existence around it a piece at a time. The order in which a room comes back is always the same, and she could recite it. The hearthstone, then the legs of the nearest trestle, then the underside of the beam, then the pegs on the wall with the measures on them, then the board by the door with the chalk marks on it, and last of all the far corner, which never really arrives at all until there is daylight in the room. Building a fire in the dark is the one job in this house that produces something to watch. The first thing she can see is the long table, wiped exactly as she left it, the wood dark and even with no shine on it anywhere. That is the state a table is supposed to be in, and it is not a state anybody notices, because it looks like nothing. What it looks like is a table. The whole of a night's work in this room produces, as its visible result, an absence of evidence that anything happened in it, and Isabel has never once thought about this, and would not find it interesting if she did. Water is the first job, and water means the fountain. There is no water in this house except what is carried into it. The city has fountains, public ones, in squares and at corners, fed through pipes from springs on the high ground outside the wall, brought in along conduits that were dug and vaulted and are maintained by men whose entire trade is walking them and clearing them. The water arrives at the fountain, and from the fountain it goes into pails, and from the pails it goes into houses on the shoulders of whoever is sent. If you've drifted this far, subscribe and let yourself drift the rest of the way. Back to the story. There is a trade for it. There are men who do nothing else but carry water by the pail for a fee, upstairs into houses all day, and they are a recognised sort of person in this city with a recognised price. Nobody in this house is paying that price. Isabel takes the 2 pails and the yoke off the hook by the door and goes out with them, and the yoke is a shaped piece of wood that sits across the back of the neck and takes the weight off the arms, and it is the single best object she has ever been handed. She carried without one for the first 4 months, a pail in each hand, and the difference is not in the weight, which is identical, but in where it sits. Weight on the hands hangs off the shoulder joint and drags at it, and the hands go dead. Weight across the back of the neck is simply weight, and a body will carry an astonishing amount of it, as long as it is put in the right place. And the whole history of every trade in this city is people working out where that place is. Outside it is the coldest part of the night, and it is entirely still. There is no wind, and there has not been any for hours. The frost has finished doing whatever it does, and is simply everywhere now. A white nap on the top of every horizontal thing, on the sill, on the posts, on the flat top of the mounting block at the corner. Her breath still does not show. The sky over the ribbon of the lane has gone from black to a black with something behind it, and that is the only difference between now and 4 hours ago. And the lane has a light in it. It is coming from the doorway of the house across and one along, spilling out low across the frozen mud in a wedge, and standing in the middle of the wedge with the door open behind her is a woman with a candle in a stick, holding it up, not looking at anything in particular. She is old, and she is dressed, and she has been dressed for some time. Isabel says a thing that is not really a greeting, and the woman says a thing back that is not really an answer, and both of them go on with what they are doing. The light in the upper window belongs to her. She sets a candle on that sill every evening when the light goes, and she puts a fresh one there when the first is finished, and she's been doing it for 3 years, and it is not for herself. Her son works at an oven 4 streets away. He's there through the night, because bread has to be in the city by morning, and the men who make it are excused the ordinance for that reason, and he comes home along this lane in the hour before it gets light, and this lane has no light in it anywhere. So there is a candle on the sill. It is not a signal, and it does not mean anything. It is simply the only lit thing between the corner and this door, and a man coming up a black lane at the end of a night's work walks toward it, and when he is level with it, he is home. The whole arrangement cost the woman 2 candles a week and about a minute a day, and she has never discussed it with a single neighbour. She's at the door now because he is due, and because she has been awake anyway, and she will go in behind him and neither of them will say much. She's not waiting anxiously. She's done this most mornings for 3 years, and on the mornings when he is late she goes back in and sits down, and on the mornings when he does not come at all, which has happened twice, she finds out in the afternoon that he was kept, and says something short to him about it, and that is the whole of the matter. The house does gold thread. That is the woman's own work, and it is a sworn craft in this city with a written statute, and a body of mistresses who took apprentices and argued in front of the provost about the terms on which girls were bound. It is fine close work on a frame, with metal-wrapped thread laid on and couched down, and it goes on to the vestments and the headdresses of people who will never know a name attached to it. She cannot do it any more. Her eyes went in the way eyes go in that trade, gradually and then not gradually, and there is a frame in the room upstairs with something on it that has been at the same stage for 2 years. She could still do the couching by feel, probably, and cannot do the laying, which is where the thread has to go down at an exact spacing and any error runs the length of the piece and shows in the light. She knew when to stop, and she stopped, which is not a thing everyone in her trade manages. What she does now is the thread itself, the winding of the metal strip onto the silk core, which is done by hand and by touch, and which she is better at than she ever was at the laying. None of that is available to Isabel, who knows only that the old woman across the lane does something with her hands that she used to do, and does not now. What Isabel has is the candle, which has been there every night she has worked here, and which she has looked at without curiosity 1,000 times, and which turns out to have an entirely ordinary explanation that was standing in a doorway the whole time. She goes up the lane with the yoke on her shoulders and the empty pail swinging and does not think about it again. The fountain is in a small square 3 streets off, and there are already 2 women at it and a boy. The basin has a lid of ice on it that has been broken this morning, and the broken pieces are standing on end in the water. The spout runs continuously, day and night, all year, and there is a permanent slick of ice around the base of it that has been built up by nights like this one into something like a low glass hill, and everyone approaches it in a particular sideways shuffle that they learned as children. The 2 women are talking, and they do not stop for her arriving, and they do not exclude her either. It is the talk of people who see each other every day at the same hour, and have long since exhausted anything that has to be said, and so what is left is a sort of continuous low commentary on the immediate, the ice, the cold, the state of somebody's roof, a horse that got loose yesterday. Isabel puts a pail under the spout and listens to it change note as it fills, and says 2 things across the course of it, and neither of them requires an answer. This is the only company she has that is not the keeper, and is not a man on a bench, and it happens every morning in the dark for the length of 2 pails, and she would not describe these women as friends and would notice at once if one of them were missing. The boy fills a jug which takes no time and goes, and neither of the women marks it. The full pails are a different proposition entirely from the empty ones, and the yoke earns itself in the first 10 paces. The weight comes down through the neck and the shoulders and out into the hips, and the trick is the swing. Because 2 pails on ropes will set up an oscillation that fights you, and the only cure is to walk at exactly the pace that keeps them still. That pace is slower than her natural one. So she goes back the 3 streets slower than she came, and the water does not slop, and by the corner she's warm for the first time since she got up. The warmth is in the wrong places, as it always is with this work, and it is up the back and across the shoulders, and not in the hands at all, because the hands are out on the pail rope steadying them and doing nothing that would warm them. By the time she's at the door, her fingers have gone past cold and into the state where they can be seen to be working and cannot be felt to be, and it will be a while by the fire before that goes. Coming down the lane, there is a man ahead of her going the same way, and the smell arrives before he does. It is not the smell of bread. It is the smell of a man who has stood beside an oven all night. Wood smoke of a particular dry kind and hot flour, and the sourness of dough on cloth. He goes in at the lit door, and the door shuts, and the wedge of light goes off the mud, and the lane is black again from end to end. Isabel gets the pails inside and off the yoke and onto the flags without a sound, which is a matter of putting the base down at an angle and rolling it flat, and it is the same trick as the cups, and she has never noticed that it is the same trick. The fire has taken properly now. There is a real flame in it, and the room has gone from a band of warmth at knee-height to something that reaches the table, and the whole place smells of new wood smoke over old wine. There is a great deal to do, and none of it is urgent yet. The keeper will be down in a while. The hoop goes back out on its pin at first light and not before. She fills the pot and hangs it, and sits down on the end of the bench in the firelight with her hands round her knees, and the wet leather of her left shoe begins slowly to steam. Outside, the sky over the lane has stopped being black. It is not light. It is the colour that comes before light, and it has taken away the stars in the ribbon overhead one at a time without anybody watching it happen. The bells will start with the smallest one, from the far end of the island. The Murray Gardens frozen. The hours on the step pass in a way she could not describe afterward, and does not try to. There is no sleeping, because sleeping on stone in a frost is a decision with consequences, and there is no staying properly awake either. What there is instead is a long shallow state in which her eyes are open and nothing is being looked at, and time comes apart into intervals that are marked by the things that happen in a square at night. The rope on the well creaking, an interval the rope creaking again, an interval somebody a long way off shutting something. She's done this often enough to know that the state is not unpleasant, and that describing it afterward makes it sound worse than it is. The misery of a night on a step is entirely at the 2 ends. Sitting down is bad for about a quarter of an hour while the cold finds its way through the sacking. Getting up is bad for about the same. The 3 hours in the middle are, in the ordinary sense of the word, nothing at all. She gets up twice and walks the 4 sides of the square. This is not restlessness. It is a fixed part of the arrangement, because a body left on a cold step for 3 hours stops being able to stand up properly, and the correction has to happen before it is needed rather than after. Each circuit takes about as long as it takes, and she does it at a good pace with her arms swinging, and comes back to the step warmer at the core and colder in the face, and sits down on the sacking again with her back against the timber. On the second circuit she stops at the well and puts her hand flat on the stone rim, which is a thing she does at every well she passes and could not account for. The stone is colder than the air. There is frost on the top of it that her palm takes off in the shape of a palm, and the shape stays there behind her as she walks away and will be gone by the time anyone comes to draw. 2 others arrive before the grey, a man with a hand barrow who nods and takes up a position on the other side of the door, and then, some while later, a woman with a bundle on her back who says a word and sits down at the far end of the step, and immediately goes to sleep sitting upright with her chin down, which is a skill Greel has never had. The order is established without a syllable being spent on it. Greel is first. Everybody can see who is first because everybody can see who was here. There is no register of the queue, and there does not need to be one, and in 11 years of doing this she has seen it disputed exactly twice, both times by men who had come from another quarter and did not know how the step worked, and both times settled by the rest of the step simply not moving. A queue is the most durable institution in this city, and nothing about it is written down anywhere. The grey when it comes does not come from the east in any way that is visible in a square hemmed by 4-storey buildings. It comes from above, and from everywhere, a general thinning, and the first thing that changes is not the sky, but the buildings, which stop being shapes and start being surfaces. The frost on the trough lid goes from a black glitter to a white one. The well and its frame arrive. The man with the barrow becomes a specific man with a specific face, and both of them look at each other and look away in the manner of people who have been 6 feet apart for an hour in the dark. The door opens from the inside, and it opens before the hour it's supposed to, which it always does, because the men who work in this building live above it and have been up for a while. The cloth goes in. It takes about 4 minutes altogether and involves almost no talking, and Greel's bolt is put on the frame first, and the sack of combed wool goes through into the back, and is somebody else's problem now, and she's on the step outside with her hands empty for the first time since yesterday afternoon. What she gets for the night is not a payment for the night. It is that the draper's cloth is in the first batch, and being reliably first is the reason the draper uses her, rather than one of 4 other people who would carry for the same money. The night is not on any account anywhere. It is folded into the fact of continuing to be given the work, which is how most of what she does is paid. The emptiness of the hands is the strangest part of the whole night. Her shoulder is still holding the shape. She catches herself walking out of the square with her left hand raised to about the height of a load that is not there, and puts it down, and it comes back up again 20 paces later, and this goes on for 2 streets before her body accepts the new arrangement. Everyone who carries knows this. Nobody remarks on it. She goes home the direct way, because the direct way is a daylight way, and this is now, by a narrow margin, daylight. The corners she chose in the afternoon last week have nothing to do with anything at this hour. She walks down the middle of streets she came up along the edges of and past the mouth of the alley. She knows runs 11 paces to a wall, and can see now that it runs 11 paces to a wall, and that there is a broken barrel in it, and a great deal of frozen refuse. The route takes her along the edge of the enclosure, and the enclosure is a city inside the city. It has its own wall and its own gate and its own courts, and inside it the rules of Paris hold in a different and weaker way. Crafts can be practiced in there by people who are not of the Paris guilds, without a mastership, without the years of binding, and the whole precinct has therefore filled up over generations with workers who could not or would not come in under the trades outside. There are looms in there, and forges, and dyeing, and every kind of finishing, and there are people living in it who have not been through the gate in a year. The guilds outside object to all of it continuously, and have objected for as long as anyone can remember, and have got nowhere, because the franchise is older than most of them, and is held by people who do not answer to the provost. What it produces practically is a wall with a great deal of work going on behind it at hours, and by hands that nobody outside has any say over. Greel has thought about it, in the way that everybody in this quarter has thought about it, and has not done it. The reason is not loyalty, and it is not fear. It is that the draper she carries for is out here, and the yard is out here, and the room she has is out here, and the work she gets comes to her through people who know her, and going in through that gate means starting the whole apparatus of being known again. From nothing, at 34. She has watched 3 people go in. 2 of them are doing well. The third comes out sometimes and stands at the corner and talks to whoever will stop, and what he says has grown more elaborate every year, and nobody in the quarter believes any of it. If you've drifted this far, subscribe and let yourself drift the rest of the way. Back to the story, and nobody says so. That is the whole of the evidence available to her, and it is not enough to decide anything on, and she has therefore decided nothing for 6 years, which is itself a decision, and she is aware of it. Behind the enclosure wall the gardens begin. This whole quarter was marsh, drained by ditch and dike over generations, and the ground that came out of it is the best growing ground for a long way, and the strips run back from the street frontages in long fingers with hedges and ditches between them. In frost they look like nothing at all. Rows of straw-covered beds, the bare frames of bean poles stacked and leaning, a pear tree with every twig outlined in white, and the whole shape of it visible for the only 3 months of the year when it is. The ditches have ice on them, and the ice has the pattern in it that ditch ice has, long feathers of white running out from the edges into a clear middle. There are 3 cabbages left in the far bed that were not worth lifting, and they have gone translucent at the outer leaves, and they will be soup as soon as somebody gets round to them. A man is out there already with a mattock, standing still, doing nothing, waiting for enough light to see where to put it. The ground he's going to open will be frozen for the first hand's depth and soft under it, and he knows that and is waiting anyway, because striking frozen ground blind is how a mattock handle goes. Greel watches him for perhaps 3 paces worth, and then the hedge comes between them and he is gone, and there is only the sound of nothing happening in a garden. And she comes level with the house. It is the same house, on the same street, 4 along from the corner, and the shutters are still closed and there is a woman's voice inside it counting. It is the same flat, unhurried count going up in ones, and it is somewhere in the 60s when Greel comes level, and it is still going when she's passed. There is no other sound from the house at all. What she's doing is reeling. Thread comes off a spindle in a shape that is no use to anybody, packed onto a shaft in whatever order it happened to go on, and before it can be sold or dyed or sized or put on a loom, it has to come off the spindle and onto a reel, a frame of a fixed span turned by hand, with the thread running onto it in loops. Every loop is the same length because the reel is the same size, so the length of the thread is the number of turns and there is no other way to know it. That is why she is counting. A skein is a set number of turns and the number is agreed and old, and when the count is reached the thread is tied off in a figure of 8 and the skein comes off the reel and is a unit. Thread is sold by the skein. Wages for spinning are reckoned by the skein. The whole economy of every room in this quarter, where a woman sits down with fibre in her hands, rests on a woman somewhere else counting out loud, in the dark, to a number, and getting it right. Greel has counted to that number more times than she has done anything else in her life. She can do it while talking, which took years, and she can do it while half asleep, which is when the errors happen, and there is a particular sick moment that every woman in this trade knows, in which you come up out of the half-sleep and are certain of the number, and are certain that you are wrong about it. There is nothing to be done at that point. You finish the skein, and you carry the doubt. It resolves itself weeks later, or it does not resolve itself at all, and the difference between a short skein and a true one is small enough that it will go through unremarked more often than not. Greel has been short and has been over, and has never once been told about either. The count is enforced by nothing except the habit of the counting, which is why the counting is done out loud, alone, in a room with nobody in it to hear. She goes on up the street. The voice behind her gets to whatever it gets to, and Greel will never know, and does not think of it as a thing she could know. It is a woman reeling before the light, at the end of a night or at the start of a day, and there is no way to tell which from out here, and it makes very little difference to the woman either. Her own room is at the top of a house on a court, and it is reached by an outside stair, and it faces north. The shutter over the window opening has the cloth stuffed in it where she put it yesterday. She takes the cloth out from the inside, and the grey comes in through the gap, and the room becomes the room. A bed, a chest, a stool, a distaff standing in the corner, a reel on the floor with a half skein on it. The light that comes through a gap 2 hands wide on a north wall at the end of a frost night is barely light at all. It's enough to find the stool by and not enough to work by, and it will not be enough to work by at any point today, and that is the whole of the argument for the oiled parchment, and she has had it with herself every winter for 11 years. She sits down on the bed without taking anything off. Her feet are past being cold and have arrived somewhere else. The shoulder is a long, dull band from the neck out to the point, and it will be there tomorrow, and probably the day after. Outside the gap, the sky over the court has gone from grey to a grey with a little colour at one edge of it. Somebody in the house below has started a fire, and the smoke comes past her window, and she can smell it, and she is glad of it and does nothing about it. There is a bell about to go, and she intends to be asleep before the end of it. The cloister wall at Notre Dame. The way from the quay goes east along the island and then turns in under a wall that is higher than anything else on this side and has almost nothing in it. There is a gate, and it is shut, and it has been shut since the bell and will be opened at another bell in a while, and behind it there is a precinct of houses and gardens and a well, and a great many cannons asleep, and the whole of it is not, in any way that matters, part of the city Perrette has spent the night walking through. She goes along under it at the pace she has kept all night, which has not varied and will not. It has its own courts. A man who lives inside that wall answers in there and not to the provost, and the boundary is exact and is known to everybody on the island to within a foot, and it runs along the line of the stones under her hand right now. There are quarrels about it constantly, about where a person was standing when a thing happened, about which side of a doorway a blow was struck. It is one of about a dozen such islands of separate law scattered through this city, and moving through Paris means moving in and out of them all day long, without any of it being marked on the ground anywhere. None of which is available to a woman walking home in the last of the dark except in the entirely practical form of knowing that this wall has no doorways in it, and that the stretch takes a while, and that the ground under it stays icy longer than anywhere else because the sun does not get to it until late in the morning. She goes along it with her shoulder about 2 feet off the stone. Her hands are in her sleeves. The ache has settled into something she is carrying rather than something that is happening to her, and the difference between those two states is the whole of what she is left to hope for from a hand. Above the wall the great church stands up into a sky that has begun to separate itself from it. An hour ago it was one mass with the dark. Now there is an edge along the top of it, and the 2 towers have arrived, and the gap between them has become a space rather than more stone. Nothing else has changed. There is no colour anywhere, and there will not be for a while, and the grey that is coming the way water comes into a low field, from underneath, and everywhere at once, and without any event in it that you could point at. The smell along here is stone and frost, and from over the wall gardens. The precinct has ground inside it, and the ground is worked, and even in a hard frost a walled garden gives off something that a street does not. Turned earth, old leaf, the sweetish rot of a heap under straw. It arrives in patches as she walks, wherever there is a gate or a gap or a lower stretch of wall, and it is one of the small landmarks of this route, and she has never once thought of it as one. It tells her, without being consulted, roughly how far along she is. The whole route home is built out of things like this. There is a place where the ground rises very slightly and the shoes tell her. There is a corner where the wind, on any night with wind in it, comes round at her from the left. There is a stretch where the echo of her own footsteps comes back off a facade and then stops coming back, and the stopping is a doorway she cannot see. A person could walk this city blind on about 40 such things, and she is closer to it than she would like. There are birds. That is the other thing that has changed, and it happened without her noticing the beginning of it. Somewhere in the gardens over the wall, a single bird has started, and then 2, and it is not the chorus of a spring morning, which is a wall of sound. It is 3 or 4 birds in a frost making short remarks a long way apart, with silences between them that are longer than the remarks. In a month there will be a great many more, for now it is the first thing since the boat that was not made by a person or by water. Perrette does the sum of the night without meaning to. 1 berth, 1 crossing, some hours in a room, nothing gone wrong. The word she would use for it, if anybody asked, is that it was an easy one, and that phrase covers a great deal of ground. It means nobody died. It means the child breathed and went on breathing. It means she did not have to reach for the cup, or say the words over a basin with 4 women watching her mouth. It means she will sleep today. It is the commonest kind of night she has, and she has never got used to it enough to stop noticing that it was one. There is a thing about her position that she has thought about more than most people would guess. Her word carries in places where the word of nearly every other woman in this city does not. When a court needs to know whether a woman is with child, and courts need to know that, in matters of inheritance, in disputes about a marriage, in the postponing of a sentence, the court does not send a physician and does not take the woman's own account. It sends matrons, sworn women, several of them, who examine and confer and report, and the report goes in as the finding of fact and the case turns on it. She has been one of those women 4 times. It is not pleasant work, and she has never refused it, because the alternative is that it gets done by somebody less careful, and because a finding of that kind decides what happens to a person afterward for years. What she remembers about all 4 is not the examinations, it is the walk to the place, and the room they were put in, and the particular quality of everybody's attention in a building, while a group of women in their 50s talked quietly in a corner, and a court sat outside waiting for them to be finished. 3 of the 4 went the way she expected. The 4th did not, and she was the one who said so out loud to 3 other women who had already made up their minds, and the conferring went on a good while longer because of it. She was right. She found that out 8 months afterward, by accident, from somebody who did not know she had been in the room. She has never told anybody that story, and there is nobody it would be any use to. So it is not that the city has no use for her judgment. It has a very precise use for it, defined and written down and reached for when it is wanted. What the city has no provision for at all is her being on a street at the wrong hour. The 2 things sit side by side without anybody having noticed that they are strange together, because they were written by different men in different rooms for different reasons, and were never once read on the same night by the same person, and there was no reason they ever would be. Perrette could not put it in those words and has never needed to. What she has instead is a set of behaviours that fit the gap exactly. The 4 words said at 30 paces, the bag carried inside the outline, the unlit lantern held low in the left hand, the pace that does not change for anything. She built all of it herself over about a decade, and nobody taught her any of it. And she has never taught it to anyone either, and she is aware tonight that this is a thing she would have to do deliberately or it would go with her. The wall ends and the street opens, and there are 2 people in it already, and one of them is a woman with a basket going the other way. They do not greet each other. It is not that hour yet. The hour of greeting begins when the bells begin, and everybody in this city knows the difference exactly, and nobody could tell you what the rule is or where they learned it. Until then, people pass each other at arm's length in a narrow street, and look at the ground, and it is not rudeness, and nobody has ever taken it as such. Her own house is on the 3rd turning, and she has a room on the 1st floor of it, up an inside stair, over a family who make shoes. The tapping starts at first light, a light irregular sound of a hammer on a last coming up through the boards, and she has slept through it every day for 19 years and would now sleep badly without it. There is no light in the ground floor yet. There will be shortly, and the 2 children will be sent out for something, and the door will go 4 times before the bells. She knows the sequence of that household's morning the way she knows the sequence of her own, and better, because theirs comes up through the floor whether she is attending to it or not. The wife first, and the fire, and then the children being got up, which takes longer than anyone in that room ever expects it to. Then the door, then the tapping. On a good day she's asleep before the tapping, and on a bad one she lies there through the whole of it and starts to sleep somewhere around the middle of the morning. On her step there is a bundle. It is pale linen, and it is tied, and it has been set down carefully and squared to the wall, in the corner where the step meets the door frame out of the wind. There is frost on the upper surface of it, which means it has been there some hours, which means somebody came and put it there in the dark and walked away again. There is nobody in the street who is looking at her. There is nobody who is going to say anything about it now or later. She knows what it is before she's bent down to it. Swaddling bands, boiled and dried and folded flat, and a shift and probably a cloth or 2, all of it hers to begin with and left behind in a room at some point in the last several weeks, and now returned in better condition than it went out in. Households that cannot pay in coin pay in this. There is no arrangement and nobody negotiates it. Linen goes out of her bag into a room, and some weeks later Linen comes back onto her step, washed, and the 2 events are never once mentioned by anybody. The one on the bridge step was not hers. There is another woman who works the streets running up from the far bridgehead, older than Perrette by a good margin, with her door within sight of that step, and the households on that side leave things there for her in exactly the same way and have done for as long as either of them has been working. Perrette saw it and knew whose it was and went past it, which is what everybody on that bridge does, and which is the reason a bundle of clean linen can sit on a public step in this city for 6 hours in the dark and still be there at first light. She picks it up. It weighs almost nothing and it is stiff with frost on the outside face and soft underneath, and she puts it under her arm and gets the latch up with the other hand. If you've drifted this far, subscribe and let yourself drift the rest of the way. Back to the story. The stair inside is dark and steep, and she goes up it the way she goes up all stairs now, one tread at a time with a hand on the wall, and the wall inside is warmer than the wall outside by an amount that is out of all proportion to the thickness of the stone between them. The room is cold and has a bed and a chest and a table and a shelf and a stool. She opens the shutter because she wants the grey, and does not want to be looking at a candle, and the grey comes in and lies on the floorboards in a shape the width of the opening. She puts the bundle on the chest to thaw. She takes off the outer layer and hangs it on the peg, and it holds the shape of her shoulders for a moment and then gives it up and hangs like cloth. Then she sits down on the edge of the bed and takes her shoes off, which is the best moment of any day of her life and has been for 30 years, and puts her bare feet flat on the boards and works the toes slowly. The boards are freezing. The feet do not care about that at all and will not for some minutes yet, and by then she intends to have them under a blanket. There is bread on the shelf from yesterday, and there is a little wine, and she's not going to have either of them, because eating at this hour on a night like this one wakes her up properly for an hour, and then she's awake in daylight with nothing to do and a night's work behind her. She learned that in her 20s, and has held to it since, and it is one of about 6 rules she has about how to live at these hours, and all 6 of them are about not fighting the body. Under the floor there is a small sound of somebody moving about in the shoemaker's room, and then nothing for a while, and then it again, further off, and a door. The girl of 15 lives 4 streets from here, and Perrette will go and talk to her mother sometime this week. The hour with no name. There is an hour at the end of a night that belongs to nobody. The bell that closed the city has been silent for a long time. The bells that will open it have not begun. In between there is a stretch that has no name and no office attached to it, and everybody who works at these hours knows it, and none of them has a word for it. And the way it is described, when it is described at all, is by saying what has not happened yet. It is before the bells. That is the whole of the vocabulary, and it does the job. The hours of this city are counted out by offices, and the offices are rung, and between the one rung deep in the night and the one rung at first light there is a gap of some length in which nothing is due. The people who are awake in it are not awake to it. They are awake at the end of something else, and the hour finds them rather than the other way round, and it is the same hour every night, and none of them would recognise it if it were described to them. In the tavern room the fire has taken and is doing what a fire does in its first proper half hour, which is to be far too interesting to look away from. Isabel is on the end of the bench with her hands round her knees and her feet turned in toward the hearthstone, and the wet leather of the left shoe is steaming very slightly, and there is a smell coming off it that is warm leather and the street. She has been sitting there longer than she meant to. The pot is hung, and the water in it has begun to make the noise that water makes a long way before it boils, which is a fine irregular whisper with nothing rhythmic in it at all. The 2 pails stand on the flags where she put them. The yoke is back on its hook. Everything that had to be brought into this house has been brought into it, and nothing further is required of anybody for some time. In her room off the court on the right bank, Greel has got as far as taking off one shoe. The other is still on. She's sitting on the edge of the bed with her hands on her thighs and her head down, and she has been in exactly that position for a while, and the grey through the gap has come up enough to put a shape on the floor. The shoulder is a band. She's aware of it in the way you are aware of a room you're in. Somewhere below the family's fire has gone and the smoke is going past her window and coming in a little. Across the water and along the island, Perrette is under a blanket with her knees drawn up and her hands tucked into the opposite armpits, which is where they go and where they have gone every night of the last 4 winters, because the ache eases from warmth in a way it does not ease from anything else. Her eyes are open. The shutter is open too, and the grey is on the boards. Under the floor there is nothing yet. The house is at its quietest and its coldest, and both of those will change within the half hour, and she knows it, and it makes no difference. She has slept through worse than a shoemaker. She has slept sitting up in a chair in a room with 4 women talking in it, twice, and woken when the one thing she was listening for changed, and gone on sleeping when it did not. Nobody in any of the 3 rooms is thinking about the night. This is worth saying plainly because it is the thing that is easiest to get wrong from outside. There is no reckoning up, no measuring of what was endured, no consideration of the ordinances or of the men on the watch, or of the difference between what the city says it is and what it actually does at 4 in the morning. The night was work. It was hard in the ordinary way that work is hard, and it is over, and the body is doing the thing the body does at the end of it, which is to go slack in stages from the outside in. The hands first, because the hands have been gripping something for hours and the grip is the first thing a body gives up. Then the shoulders, then the jaw, which nobody ever notices about themselves and everybody has noticed about somebody else asleep in a chair. Then the whole arrangement of the spine, which lets go last and all at once, and which is the thing that makes a person's head come down against a wall. The fire in the tavern room settles and drops a piece, and Isabel does not get up to it. Her chin has come down about an inch. The room around her has become fully visible now, in a way it has not been since yesterday afternoon. The long table with its worn dish along the middle, the pegs with the measures on them, the board by the door with its chalk marks, the straw pushed about on the flags, all of it exactly as it was and exactly as it will be, and none of it requiring anything from her for another little while. The hoop is by the door where she put it. The measures are on their pegs. The bucket is upside down on the flags with a ring of damp round it. It is the state the room is supposed to be in at this hour, and it is the state she put it in, and it took a night, and there is no evidence anywhere in the room that a night was required. Greel takes the other shoe off, eventually, which requires bending, which she does in one movement and regrets briefly. Then she lies back without getting properly onto the bed, so that her legs are still over the side and her feet are off the floor, and this is not a position anyone would choose, and it is the one she is in. The blanket is under her rather than over her. Her breathing has already changed, and she has not noticed and will not. The cold in Perity's room is still cold, and the blanket is doing its work slowly from the outside. She can feel it arriving at her back first and then along the thighs, and the feet are last and will be a while, and the hands are last of all. 19 years in this room, 19 years of the tapping through the boards. She thinks about the girl for perhaps 4 seconds and then does not, and the not thinking is not a decision, it is simply what happens when a mind that has been holding something all night is allowed to put it down. Out in the streets between the 3 of them, the city is doing the small unattended things it does at this hour. Frost coming off the north face of a post where a hand has touched it. Water running in a gutter over a stone with a tick in it. A rope moving on a roller above a well in a square with nobody in it. Ice on a trough with a dark, ragged hole in it that has closed over thinner in the last hour and will be broken again shortly by a boy with the back of an axe. The dogs have stopped. Nobody notices when the dogs stop because a thing stopping is the hardest event in the world to attend to, and there is a stretch in every night when the last of them gives up, and the whole city is without a dog in it for perhaps an hour. It is the quietest Paris ever is. It happens at this hour and only at this hour, and there is nobody awake enough at the right moment to say so, and by the time the first cart comes over a bridge there will be dogs again everywhere. They are not owned, most of them. They belong to a street rather than to a house, and they are fed in the way such animals are fed, which is by 6 people who would each deny doing it, and they run the city all night in 1s and 2s and settle in doorways at the end of it. The doorway one of them has settled in tonight is the one with the broom leant in it that Greel walked past hours ago. In the tavern, the water in the pot has come up to the point where the noise changes from a whisper to something with structure in it, and Isabel hears it and does not get up. Her eyes have been closed for a while in the way that eyes close when a person is sitting near a fire and has not yet given permission for anything. The heat is on the front of her shins and on her face, and she's cold at the back, in the usual arrangement, and she does not turn. The song does not come back. That is the way of it. It arrives when she's moving and does not when she is still, and she has not worked that out and never will. What she has instead, in the front of her mind, is nothing much. The shape of the pot handle, the sound of the water, the fact that the hoop has to go out. These are not thoughts so much as the last few objects left on a table before somebody clears it. She'll get up in a minute. She has been going to get up in a minute for some time now, and each minute has been an honest one. The keeper will come down the boxed stair backward with both hands on the rail, and she will be up before he's at the bottom, and the day will start, and it will be a day very much like the one before it. Greel's room faces north, and will not have direct light in it at any point today, and the grey through the two-hand gap has stopped increasing, and it will stay at about this level from now until the middle of the afternoon, and then start going the other way. This is January. It is what January is for a person in a room like this, and she has had 11 of them here, and has stopped filing a complaint about it with herself, and the oiled parchment goes on being the thing she has not got. What she does about the light in practice is what everybody does, which is to arrange the work so the parts that need seeing happen at the top of the day, and the parts that do not happen at the bottom of it. Reeling can be done in almost no light, winding can be done in none. The drawing out of a fine thread cannot, and that is the work that pays best, and that is the whole of the difficulty stated as plainly as it can be stated. Her feet are hanging off the bed, and the blood has begun to come back into them, which is the hot, prickling stage, and it arrives and does its business and goes away again, and she's not far enough awake to be bothered by it. The shoulder is easing by degrees now that the arm is not holding a shape. There is a point about 40 minutes into lying down when a carried load finally stops being carried, and she is nearly at it. It arrives as a kind of settling out along the whole of the left side from the neck down past the hip, and it does not feel like relief, and it does not feel like anything much, and she will not be conscious for it. The last thing she's aware of is the smoke from the fire below coming past the gap and a little of it coming in, and it smells like a house with people in it. Perrette's hands have got warm. It took the whole of the time she's been lying there, and it has happened at last, and the ache has gone from a thing with edges to a thing without them. The grey on the boards has crept a hand's width across the floor, without appearing to move. Somewhere out over the roofs, one of the birds from the cloister garden says something short, and nothing answers it. Then, after a good while, something answers it. Then nothing again for longer than seems likely. The intervals between them are the last thing she's measuring anything by, and the measuring gets less accurate, and then it stops being measuring and becomes only listening, and then it stops being that. In the streets, the first of the carts is not moving yet. It is standing in a yard by a gate with a man beside it who is waiting for the same thing everyone at a gate is waiting for. The gates are shut. They will not be shut for much longer. The whole of the city's traffic is standing at its edges in the dark on both banks with its breath going up, doing nothing in the last of the hour that has no name. There is a thin, cold smell everywhere now that is the smell a city has only in the 20 minutes before it starts again. Ash, stone, frost, river, and under all of it the first of the ovens, which have been going all night and are at their last stage, and which are the reason there is a smell of bread in this city at an hour when nobody has begun to want any. Isabel's head comes down against the wall and stays there. Greel's feet come up onto the bed, one and then the other, without her being present for it. Perrette has stopped feeling the boards under the blanket and stopped hearing the birds and stopped, somewhere in the last minute or two, keeping track of any of it. The fire in the tavern room burns steadily and gives up its heat into a room with one person in it who is no longer awake. The grey goes on, coming up over the whole of the city at the same rate, and in a while the bells will start and the smallest one goes first. The bell that opens? It starts with the smallest one, from the far end of the island, and it is a thin bell with a crack in it somewhere that has been there for longer than anyone in the city has been alive. It goes for a while on its own. Then something larger comes in from the left bank, and then something larger still from the right. And within a short time there are bells all over Paris going at different speeds and in different keys with no relation to one another whatsoever. And the effect is not music and is not meant to be. It is a great many separate announcements happening to be made at the same time. You are standing in a street to hear it, and there is nowhere in this city you could stand and not hear it. The sound comes off the stone and out of the sky at once, and it arrives at the walls of a narrow lane from both sides, and there is a moment near the beginning where it is genuinely difficult to tell which direction any of it is coming from. Then the ear sorts it out, as it always does, and the bells separate and become individual buildings, and everybody in the city knows which is which and could name them without looking up. A person born in this quarter can tell you where they are from the bells alone, in the dark, in fog, from a room with no window. It is the first geography anybody here learns, and it is learned without being taught, and it is more reliable than the streets, which change, and than the river, which is only in one place. Children can do it before they can do anything else useful. What the bells do is open the gates. That is their practical content, and everything else about them is old and layered on top. The bars come off the bridgeheads, the chains come down out of their rings at the ends of the streets and drop into the gutters, where they will lie all day being run over. There is a man at each of them doing it with a hook because the links are cold enough to take skin, and it takes very little time, and the city goes from a set of closed compartments to a single connected thing in about the space of 5 minutes. Nobody watches it happen. There is no moment anybody attends to and no signal beyond the bells, and the men taking the chains down have done it every morning of their working lives and do it with their minds entirely elsewhere. If you've drifted this far, subscribe and let yourself drift the rest of the way. Back to the story. The whole nightly closing and opening of Paris is carried out by about 40 people, who regard it as the least interesting part of their job. The carts have been standing at the edges of it in the dark with their breath going up, and they come in immediately, because a cart that gets in first sells first, and the men driving them have been standing in a frost for an hour on exactly that reasoning. The sound of a cart on frozen ground is not the sound of a cart on mud. It is hard and bright, and it carries an extraordinary distance. Iron rims on stone, and the first of them coming over the small bridge can be heard from the middle of the island, and it goes through the whole quarter like something being dragged across a roof. After the first one there is a second and then several, and inside a quarter of an hour the sound of iron on stone has become continuous and will not stop until the light goes. It is the floor of every daylight hour in this city. Nobody who lives here hears it. People who come in from the country hear nothing else for 2 days and then stop hearing it as well. In the tavern room Isabel is up and has been for a little while. The hoop has gone back out on its pin above the lintel, which is the entire ceremony by which this house declares itself open, and she did it with cold fingers, and did not touch the iron of the pin this time. The shutters are back and hooked. The door stands wide. The wedge of light that was a thing to be avoided 6 hours ago now falls across the threshold from the outside in, and there is nothing in this city that would care about it either way. She's on the second pot of water and the fire is up properly, and the room smells of wood smoke over old wine, and there are 3 men already at the far table who came in off a night's work somewhere and are not talking much. She moves between them with a jug and takes the measure off its peg and pours and puts the measure back, and nobody looks at her, and nobody has any reason to, and this is the ordinary condition of her working day, and it is the reason the night is invisible from inside it. If you asked her about last night, she would not know what you meant. She would think you were asking whether the room had been busy. The part of it that would interest anybody outside. The barred door, the strip of light, the stave butt going past the top of the lane, is to her a description of Tuesday, and of the Tuesday before that, and of every Tuesday she can remember. The keeper is at the board with the chalk. Somebody has wiped a mark off with his thumb and is standing there while it is being confirmed, and the whole transaction takes 4 seconds and involves 1 word. The straw on the floor has been pulled about and looks no better. The long table has begun to acquire the first of the day's rings and spills, and will be back to its full state by the middle of the morning, and will be wiped down again tonight and will look, at the end of it, exactly as it looks now. Across the water, Greel is asleep and will be until well into the afternoon. The house below her has come fully alive. There is a fire and there are voices and a door going, and the smoke goes past her window, and a little of it comes in through the gap, and none of it reaches her. The grey through the opening has come up to whatever it is going to be today and stopped. On the floor beside the bed the reel lies with the half skein on it, exactly where it was when she came in, and it will be the first thing her hand goes to when she gets up. She will eat first and then reel for the rest of what light there is, and the counting will go out through the shutter gap into the court, the way the other woman's went out into the street, and somebody walking past below will hear it and not think about it, and that is the arrangement all the way down. The cloth she carried is on a frame in the weigh house with a man's hands going over it. He runs it across the bar and along his palm, looking for the places where the light catches wrong, and he has been doing this for 30 years, and his eyes go faster than any account of the process would suggest. The length is taken, the breadth is taken. Then the lead goes through the selvage and the dye comes down on it, and the bolt is a thing that can be sold in another country to a man who will never come here. On the island, Perrette is asleep with her hands in her armpits and the shutter open, and the grey lying on the boards, and the tapping has started below her, light and irregular, and it did not wake her, and has not for 19 years. The bundle of linen is on the chest, thawed now, gone soft, with a dark patch under it where the frost came off. She will boil it again anyway when she gets up, because she boils everything, and she could not tell you where she got the habit. It came from the woman who trained her, who did it without explaining it, the way she did everything, and who had it from somebody before that. A great deal of what Perrette knows arrived this way, as practice without reason attached, and some of it is sound and some of it is not, and there is no method available to anyone for telling which is which. What she has instead is 30 years of rooms and the outcomes of them, which is a slow instrument and the only one there is. In the house on the far bank, the woman she sat with all night is asleep too, and the child is asleep, and there is a woman in that room whose whole task now is to be awake instead of them, and she's sitting by a fire with her hands in her lap doing nothing at all. Somebody will bring bread. In 2 or 3 days there will be a walk to a church, and the whole thing will get one line in a book, the child's name and the parents' names and the date, and that line will still be there in 600 years and Perrette's name will not be on it. The city fills up over the course of about an hour, and it does it from the gates inward. First the carts, then the water carriers with their yokes and their pails going out to the fountains and back, then the criers, and the criers are the point at which it becomes properly loud. There are criers for everything. Wine, fish, bread, water, hot pies, old iron, and each of them has a phrase and a pitch and a root, and the whole of it together is the sound this city makes for the next 11 hours without a break. The wine crier comes to the tavern door not long after the bells. He takes the measure and tastes and stands for a second, and then goes off up the lane calling the price in the house, and the phrase goes away from the door and comes back off the far wall and then diminishes toward the corner. Isabel hears the whole of it from inside without stopping what she's doing. It is the first thing every day, and it has been the first thing every day for 2 years. The lane outside is not the lane it was. It is full. There are people in it going both ways, and a boy with a barrow and 2 women arguing about something on a doorstep with no heat in it at all, and the frost is coming off the south-facing side and staying on the north, and the mud in the middle will be soft again by noon, and will be a misery by the evening. Nobody stepping over the fallen chain at the corner looks down at it. It is a thing on the ground. Children play with them. There is a game involving a chain lying slack in a gutter that every child in this quarter has played, and that no adult can remember the rules of, and there are 2 boys at it now at the corner, while a woman waits for them with a basket and does not hurry them. The links have worn the stone at the ring into a bright bevel, and the bevel gets a little brighter every year. You could stand at that corner all day and see nothing that would tell you what this street was 6 hours ago. That is not a loss, and nothing has been hidden. A street in daylight is simply a different place with different rules and different people in it, and the version of it that had a chain up and no light in it anywhere is not underneath this one waiting to be found. It comes back at the bell. It goes at the bell. It has been doing that for longer than any building on the street has been standing. The old woman across the lane has taken her candle in off the sill and put it out and put it away in the box, and she will take a new one out this evening when the light starts to go, and set it on the same worn place on the wood where 3 years of candles have stood. Her son is asleep in the back room. The frame in the upstairs room stands where it stands with the same piece on it at the same stage. In the square with the well, a boy has broken the ice on the trough with the back of an axe, and everybody within 4 streets heard it and nobody remarked on it, and the pieces are floating in the dark water and turning slowly. The rope on the roller is being used properly now and is making a working sound rather than a creak. There are 6 people round it, and there will be more. Out beyond the wall, the sun is up somewhere behind cloud, and it's not going to get into most of these streets today at all. The light in the city will be the light it has been since first thing, even grey without any direction in it, coming down the ribbon between the overhangs and reaching the ground with about half of itself left. It is enough for a cart and not enough for gold thread, and everybody has arranged their life around the difference. The work that needs the good light goes to the rooms that have it, which are the upper floors on the wide streets and the north-lit halls of the Way House, and the workshops of people who could afford to build for it. Everything else is done in what is left. That is the actual distribution of daylight in this city, and it is more consequential than most of the ordinances, and it is not written anywhere at all. The bells finish, one at a time, in no order, with a small cracked one on the island going on for a while after the rest have stopped, the way it always does. And then it stops too, and what is underneath it is a city, working in the daylight, with 3 of its people asleep in 3 rooms and nothing anywhere to say that they had been anywhere at all. Let the street go on without you now. It does not need watching. The carts come over the bridge and the criers take their routes and the chains lie in the gutters all day, and none of it is going anywhere that has to be followed. Somewhere behind a shutter, Isabel will finish the day and wipe the long table down and take the hoop off its pin, and the room will go back to the state it was in, and the coals will go under their pierced lid. Somewhere across the water, Greel will sit down with the reel and count out loud in a room with no one in it. Somewhere on the island, Peretti will wake in the afternoon and go and speak to a mother about a girl of 15. None of that is tonight. None of it is anything you have to be awake for. The 3 of them go where they go, and we do not go after them. What is left is the city. Stone that holds the day's damp and gives up none of its warmth. A gutter running down the middle of a lane, over a stone, with a tick in it. Frost on the north side of a post, and none on the south. A rope on a roller above a well, turning slowly. The river underneath everything, not a sound like water exactly. A softness at the edge of the hearing where the noise of the streets ought to come back and does not. It has been there all night, it is there now. Let your shoulders down. Let the weight of the day be a load that has been set on the ground beside you, and let the arms stop holding the shape of it, the way an arm does, slowly, over a while. Warm at the front, cool at the back. That is the ordinary arrangement of a body near a fire, and it is enough. Coals under an iron lid, giving up their heat in threads, through small holes, all night, without any flame in them at all. A room going quiet in stages, the hands first, then the shoulders, then the jaw, then everything else, all at once and without being asked. Somewhere a long way off a bell and then no bell. Water in a pot a long way before it boils. Frost, stone, the small settling of a fire. Nothing to carry, nothing to be at by morning, nothing owed to anybody until the light. Let it be dark, let it be quiet, let it be cold outside and warm where you are. Sleep now. If you are drifting now, let yourself go. Subscribe so the next story is waiting when you return. Sleep well. If you like this video, let me know where in the world you're watching from and what time it is. I'm always curious about that. And if you have a suggested topic, feel free to leave it in the comments.